The Secret Doctrine. The Synthesis of Science, Religion, and Philosophy. By Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Author of Isis Unveiled. Third and Revised Edition. Satyad Nasti Parodharma. There is no religion higher than truth. Volume I. Cosmogenesis. This work I dedicate to all true theosophists, in every country, and of every race, for they called it forth, and for them it was recorded. Preface to the first edition. The author, the writer, rather feels it necessary to apologize for the long delay which has occurred in the appearance of this work. It has been occasioned by ill health and the magnitude of the undertaking. Even the 2 volumes now issued do not complete the scheme, nor do these treat exhaustively of the subjects dealt with in them. A large quantity of material has already been prepared, dealing with the history of occultism as contained in the lives of the great adepts of the Aryan race, and showing the bearing of occult philosophy upon the conduct of life, as it is and as it ought to be. Should the present volumes meet with a favorable reception, no effort will be spared to carry out the scheme of the work in its entirety. This scheme, it must be added, was not in contemplation when the preparation of the work was first announced. As originally announced, it was intended that the Secret Doctrine should be an amended and enlarged version of Isis Unveiled. It was, however, soon found that the explanations which could be added to those already put before the world, in the last named and other works dealing with esoteric science, were such as to require a different method of treatment, and consequently the present volumes do not contain, in all, 20 pages extracted from Isis Unveiled. The author does not feel it necessary to ask the indulgence of her readers and critics for the many defects of literary style, and the imperfect English which may be found in these pages. She is a foreigner, and her knowledge of the language was acquired late in life. The English tongue is employed because it offers the most widely diffused medium for conveying the truths which it had become her duty to place before the world. These truths are in no sense put forward as a revelation, nor does the author claim the position of a revealer of mystic lore, now made public for the first time in the world's history. For what is contained in this work is to be found scattered throughout thousands of volumes embodying the scriptures of the great Asiatic and early European religions, hidden under glyph and symbol, and hitherto left unnoticed because of this veil. What is now attempted is to gather the oldest tenets together and to make of them one harmonious and unbroken whole. The sole advantage which the writer has over her predecessors, is that she need not resort to personal speculations and theories. For this work is a partial statement of what she herself has been taught by more advanced students, supplemented, in a few details only, by the results of her own study and observation. The publication of many of the facts herein stated has been rendered necessary by the wild and fanciful speculations in which many theosophists and students of mysticism have indulged, during the last few years, in their endeavor, as they imagined, to work out a complete system of thought from the few facts previously communicated to them. It is needless to explain that this book is not the Secret Doctrine in its entirety, but a select number of fragments of its fundamental tenets, special attention being paid to some facts which have been seized upon by various writers, and distorted out of all resemblance to the truth. But it is perhaps desirable to state unequivocally that the teachings, however fragmentary and incomplete, contained in these volumes, do not belong to the Hindu, the Zoroastrian, the Chaldean, or the Egyptian religion, nor to Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, or Christianity exclusively. The Secret Doctrine is the essence of all these. Sprung from it in their origins, the various religious schemes are now made to merge back into their original element, out of which every mystery and dogma has grown, developed, and become materialized. It is more than probable that the book will be regarded by a large section of the public as a romance of the wildest kind, for who has ever even heard of the Book of Jinn? The writer, therefore, is fully prepared to take all the responsibility for what is contained in this work, and even to face the charge of having invented the whole of it. That it has many shortcomings she is fully aware. All that she claims for it is that, romantic as it may seem to many, its logical coherence and consistency entitle this new genesis to rank, at any rate, on a level with the working hypotheses so freely accepted by modern science. Further, it claims consideration, not by reason of any appeal to dogmatic authority, but because it closely adheres to nature, and follows the laws of uniformity and analogy. The aim of this work may be thus stated: to show that nature is not a fortuitous concurrence of atoms, and to assign to man his rightful place in the scheme of the universe, to rescue from degradation the archaic truths which are the basis of all religions, to uncover, to some extent, the fundamental unity from which they all spring, finally, to show that the occult side of nature has never been approached by the science of modern civilization. If this is in any degree accomplished, the writer is content. It is written in the service of humanity, and by humanity and the future generations it must be judged. Its author recognizes no inferior court of appeal. Abuse she is accustomed to, calumny she is daily acquainted with, at slander she smiles in silent contempt. De minimis non curat lex. H.P.B. London, October, 1888. Preface to the third and revised edition. In preparing this edition for the press, we have striven to correct minor points of detail in literary form, without touching at all more important matters. Had H.P. Blavatsky lived to issue the new edition, she would doubtless have corrected and enlarged it to a very considerable extent. That this is not done is one of the many minor losses caused by the one great loss. Awkward phrases, due to imperfect knowledge of English, have been corrected, most of the quotations have been verified, and exact references given, a work involving great labor, as the references in the previous editions were often very loose. A uniform system of transliteration for Sanskrit words has been adopted. Rejecting the form most favored by Western Orientalists as being misleading to the general reader, we have given to the consonants not present in our English alphabet combinations that approximately express their sound values, and we have carefully inserted quantities, wherever they occur, on the vowels. In a few instances we have incorporated notes in the text, but this has been very sparingly done, and only when they obviously formed part of it. We have added a copious index for the assistance of students, and have bound it separately, so that reference to it may be facilitated. For the great labor in this we, and all students, are the debtors of Mr. A. J. Falding. Annie Besant. G.R.S. Mead. London, 1893. Introductory. Gently to hear, kindly to judge. Shakespeare. Since the appearance of theosophical literature in England, it has become customary to call its teachings esoteric Buddhism. And, having become a habit as an old proverb based on daily experience has it, error runs down an inclined plane, while truth has to laboriously climb its way uphill. Old truisms are often the wisest. The human mind can hardly remain entirely free from bias, and decisive opinions are often formed before a thorough examination of a subject from all its aspects has been made. This is said with reference to the prevailing double mistake, a. of limiting theosophy to Buddhism, and b. of confounding the tenets of the religious philosophy preached by Gautama, the Buddha, with the doctrines broadly outlined in esoteric Buddhism. Anything more erroneous than this could hardly be imagined. It has enabled our enemies to find an effective weapon against theosophy, because, as an eminent Pali scholar very pointedly expressed it, there was in the volume named neither esotericism nor Buddhism. The esoteric truths, presented in Mr. Sinnott's work, ceased to be esoteric from the moment they were made public, nor did the book contain the religion of Buddha, but simply a few tenets from a hitherto hidden teaching, which are now explained and supplemented by many more in the present volumes. And even the latter, though giving out many fundamental tenets from the secret doctrine of the East, raise but a small corner of the dark veil. For no one, not even the greatest living adept, would be permitted to, or could even if he would give out promiscuously to a mocking, unbelieving world that which has been so effectually concealed from it for long eons and ages. Esoteric Buddhism was an excellent work with a very unfortunate title, though it meant no more than does the title of this work, The Secret Doctrine. It proved unfortunate, because people are always in the habit of judging things by their appearance rather than by their meaning, and because the error has now become so universal, that even most of the fellows of the Theosophical Society have fallen victims to the same misconception. From the first, however, protests were raised by Brahmins and others against the title, and, in justice to myself, I must add that Esoteric Buddhism was presented to me as a completed volume, and that I was entirely unaware of the manner in which the author intended to spell the word Buddhism. This has to be laid directly at the door of those who, having been the first to bring the subject under public notice, neglected to point out the difference between Buddhism, the religious system of ethics preached by the Lord Gautama, and so named from his title of Buddha, the enlightened, and Buddhism, from Buddha, wisdom or knowledge, vidya, the faculty of cognizing, from the Sanskrit root bud, to know. We Theosophists of India are ourselves the real culprits, although, at the time, we did our best to correct the mistake. One, to avoid this deplorable misnomer was easy, the spelling of the word had only to be altered, and by common consent both pronounced and written Buddhism, instead of Buddhism. Nor is the latter term correctly spelt and pronounced, as it ought to be called, in English, Buddhism, and its votaries Buddhists. This explanation is absolutely necessary at the beginning of a work like the present. The wisdom religion is the inheritance of all the nations, the world over, in spite of the statement made in Esoteric Buddhism 2 years ago, i.e., in 1883, neither I, nor any other European living, knew the alphabet of the science, here for the first time put into a scientific shape, etc. This error must have crept in through inadvertence. The present writer knew all that is divulged in Esoteric Buddhism, and much more, many years before it became her duty, in 1880, to impart a small portion of the secret doctrine to two European gentlemen, one of whom was the author of Esoteric Buddhism, and surely the present writer has the undoubted, though to her, rather equivocal, privilege of being a European by birth and education. Moreover, a considerable part of the philosophy expounded by Mr. Sinnett was taught in America, even before Isis Unveiled was published, to two Europeans and to my colleague, Colonel H. S. Alcott. Of the three teachers the latter gentleman has had, the first was a Hungarian initiate, the second an Egyptian, the third a Hindu. As permitted, Colonel Alcott has given out some of this teaching in various ways. If the other two have not, it has been simply because they were not allowed, their time for public work having not yet come. But for others it has, and the appearance of Mr. Sinnett's several interesting books is a visible proof of the fact. Moreover, it is above everything important to keep in mind that no theosophical book acquires the least additional value from pretended authority. Adi, or Adi Buddha, the one, or the first, and supreme wisdom, is a term used by Aryazanga in his secret treatises, and now by all the mystic northern Buddhists. It is a Sanskrit term, and an appellation given by the earliest Aryans to the unknown deity, the word Brahma not being found in the Vedas and the early works. It means the absolute wisdom, and Adabhuta is translated by Fitz-Edward Hall, the primeval uncreated cause of all. Eons of untold duration must have elapsed, before the epithet of Buddha was so humanized, so to speak, as to allow of the term being applied to mortals, and finally appropriated to one whose unparalleled virtues and knowledge caused him to receive the title of the Buddha of wisdom unmoved. Bodha means the innate possession of divine intellect or understanding, Buddha, the acquirement of it by personal efforts and merit, while buddhi is the faculty of cognizing, the channel through which divine knowledge reaches the ego, the discernment of good and evil, also divine conscience, and the spiritual soul, which is the vehicle of Atma. When buddhi absorbs our egotism, destroys it, with all its vikaras, Avalokiteshvara becomes manifested to us, and nirvana, or mutti, is reached, mutti being the same as nirvana, i.e., freedom from the trammels of maya or illusion. Bodhi is likewise the name of a particular state of trance condition, called samadhi, during which the subject reaches the culmination of spiritual knowledge. Unwise are those who, in their blind and, in our age, untimely hatred of Buddhism, and, by reaction, of Buddhism, deny its esoteric teachings, which are those also of the Brahmins, simply because the name suggests what to them, as monotheists, are noxious doctrines. Unwise is the correct term to use in their case. For in this age of crass and illogical materialism, the esoteric philosophy alone is calculated to withstand the repeated attacks on all and everything man holds most dear and sacred in his inner spiritual life. The true philosopher, the student of esoteric wisdom, entirely loses sight of personalities, dogmatic beliefs, and special religions. Moreover, esoteric philosophy reconciles all religions, strips every one of its outward human garments, and shows the root of each to be identical with that of every other great religion. It proves the necessity of a divine absolute principle in nature. It denies deity no more than it does the sun. Esoteric philosophy has never rejected God in nature, nor deity as the absolute and abstract ends. It only refuses to accept any of the gods of the so-called monotheistic religions, gods created by man in his own image and likeness, a blasphemous and sorry caricature of the ever unknowable. Furthermore, the records we mean to place before the reader embrace the esoteric tenets of the whole world since the beginning of our humanity, and Buddhistic occultism occupies therein only its legitimate place, and no more. Indeed, the secret portions of the Dan or Jana, Dhyana, three of Gautama's metaphysics, grand as they appear to one unacquainted with the tenets of the wisdom religion of antiquity, are but a very small portion of the whole. The Hindu reformer limited his public teachings to the purely moral and physiological aspect of the wisdom religion, to ethics and man alone. Things unseen and incorporeal, the mysteries of being outside our terrestrial sphere, the great teacher left entirely untouched in his public lectures, reserving the hidden truths for a select circle of his arhats. The latter received their initiation at the famous Saptaparna cave, the Satapani of Mahavansa, near Mount Babhar, the Webura of the Pali manuscripts. This cave was in Rajagriha, the ancient capital of Magadha, and was the Cheetah Cave of Fahian, as is rightly suspected by some archaeologists. 4. Time and human imagination made short work of the purity and philosophy of these teachings, once that they were transplanted from the secret and sacred circle of the Arhats, during the course of their work of proselytism, into a soil less prepared for metaphysical conceptions than India, i.e., once they were transferred into China, Japan, Siam, and Burma. How the pristine purity of these grand revelations was dealt with may be seen in studying some of the so-called esoteric Buddhist schools of antiquity in their modern garb, not only in China and other Buddhist countries in general, but even in not a few schools of Tibet, which have been left to the care of uninitiated lamas and Mongolian innovators. Thus the reader is asked to bear in mind the very important difference between Orthodox Buddhism, i.e., the public teachings of Gautama, the Buddha, and his esoteric Buddhism. His secret doctrine, however, differed in no wise from that of the initiated Brahmins of his day. The Buddha was a child of Aryan soil, a born Hindu, a Kshatriya, and a disciple of the twice-born, the initiated Brahmins, or Dvijas. His teachings, therefore, could not be different from their doctrines, for the whole Buddhist reform consisted merely in giving out a portion of that which had been kept secret from every man outside of the enchanted circle of ascetics and temple initiates. Unable, owing to his pledges, to teach all that had been imparted to him, though the Buddha taught a philosophy built upon the groundwork of the true esoteric knowledge, he gave to the world only its outward material body and kept its soul for his elect. Many Chinese scholars among Orientalists have heard of the soul doctrine. None seem to have understood its real meaning and importance. That doctrine was preserved secretly, too secretly, perhaps within the sanctuary. The mystery that shrouded its chief dogma and aspiration, nirvana, has so tried and irritated the curiosity of those scholars who have studied it, that, unable to solve it logically and satisfactorily by untying its Gordian knot, they have cut it through by declaring that nirvana means absolute annihilation. Toward the end of the first quarter of this century, a distinct class of literature appeared in the world, which with every year became more defined in its tendency. Being based, soi-disant, on the scholarly researches of Sanskritists and Orientalists in general, it was considered scientific. Hindu, Egyptian, and other ancient religions, myths, and emblems were made to yield anything the symbologist wanted them to yield, and thus often the rude outward form was given out in place of the inner meaning. Works, most remarkable for their ingenious deductions and speculations, circulo vicioso, foregone conclusions generally taking the place of premises in the syllogisms of more than one Sanskrit and Pali scholar, appeared rapidly in succession, overflooding the libraries with dissertations on phallic and sexual worship rather than on real symbology, and each contradicting the other. This is the true reason, perhaps, why the outline of a few fundamental truths from the secret doctrine of the archaic ages is now permitted to see the light, after long millenniums of the most profound silence and secrecy. I say advisedly a few truths, because that which must remain unsaid could not be contained in 100 such volumes, nor could it be imparted to the present generation of Sadducees. But even the little that is now given is better than complete silence upon these vital truths. The world of today, in its mad career towards the unknown, which the physicist is too ready to confound with the unknowable, whenever the problem eludes his grasp, is rapidly progressing on the reverse plane to that of spirituality. It has now become a vast arena, a true valley of discord and of eternal strife, a necropolis, wherein lie buried the highest and the most holy aspirations of our spirit soul. That soul becomes with every new generation more paralyzed and atrophied. The amiable infidels and accomplished profligates of society, spoken of by Greeley, care little for the revival of the dead sciences of the past, but there is a fair minority of earnest students who are entitled to learn the few truths that may be given to them now, and now much more than 10 years ago, when Isis Unveiled appeared, or even when the later attempts to explain the mysteries of esoteric science were published. One of the greatest and perhaps the most serious objection to the correctness and reliability of the whole work will be the preliminary stanzas. How can the statements contained in them be verified? True, though a great portion of the Sanskrit, Chinese, and Mongolian works quoted in the present volumes is known to some Orientalists, yet the chief work, that one from which the stanzas are given, is not in the possession of European libraries. The Book of Jin, or Jin, is utterly unknown to our philologists, or at any rate was never heard of by them under its present name. This is, of course, a great drawback to those who follow the methods of research prescribed by official science, but to students of occultism, and to every genuine occultist, this will be of little moment. The main body of the doctrines given, however, is found scattered throughout hundreds and thousands of Sanskrit manuscripts, some already translated disfigured in their interpretations, as usual others still waiting their turn. Every scholar, therefore, has an opportunity of verifying the statements herein made, and of checking most of the quotations. A few new facts, new to the profane Orientalist only, and passages quoted from the commentaries will be found difficult to trace. Several of the teachings also have hitherto been transmitted orally, yet even these in every instance are hinted at in the almost countless volumes of Brahmanical, Chinese, and Tibetan temple literature. However it may be, and whatsoever is in store for the writer through malevolent criticism, one fact is quite certain. The members of several esoteric schools, the seat of which is beyond the Himalayas, and whose ramifications may be found in China, Japan, India, Tibet, and even in Syria, and also South America, claim to have in their possession the sum total of sacred and philosophical works in manuscripts and print, all the works, in fact, that have ever been written, in whatever language or character, since the art of writing began, from the ideographic hieroglyphs down to the alphabet of Cadmus and the Devanagari. It has been constantly claimed that, ever since the destruction of the Alexandrian library, every work of a character that might lead the profane to the ultimate discovery and comprehension of some of the mysteries of the secret science, owing to the combined efforts of the members of these brotherhoods, has been diligently searched for. It is added, moreover, by those who know, that once found all such works were destroyed, save 3 copies of each which were preserved and safely stored away. In India, the last of these precious manuscripts were secured and hidden during the reign of the Emperor Akbar. Professor Max Muller shows that no bribes or threats of Akbar could extort the original text of the Vedas from the Brahmins, and yet boasts that European Orientalists have it. 6. That Europe has the complete text is exceedingly doubtful, and the future may have very disagreeable surprises in store for the Orientalists. It is maintained, furthermore, that every sacred book of this kind, the text of which was not sufficiently veiled in symbolism, or which had any direct references to the ancient mysteries, was first carefully copied in cryptographic characters, such as to defy the art of the best and cleverest paleographer, and then destroyed to the last copy. During Akbar's reign, some fanatical courtiers, displeased at the emperor's sinful prying into the religions of the infidels, themselves helped the Brahmins to conceal their MSS. Such was Badayani, who had an undisguised horror of Akbar's mania for idolatrous religions. Badayani, in his Muntakab at Tawarik, writes, as they the Shramana and Brahmins surpass other learned men in their treatises on morals and on physical and religious sciences, and reach a high degree in their knowledge of the future, in spiritual power, and human perfection, they brought proofs based on reason and testimony, and inculcated their doctrines so firmly, that no man could now raise a doubt in his majesty, even if mountains were to crumble to dust, or the heavens were to tear asunder. His Majesty relished inquiries into the sects of these infidels, who cannot be counted, so numerous they are, and who have no end of revealed books. 7. This work was kept secret and was not published till the reign of Jahangir. Moreover, in all the large and wealthy lamasaries, there are subterranean crypts and cave libraries, cut in the rock, whenever the Gonpa and Lhakhang are situated in the mountains. Beyond the western Psetum, in the solitary passes of Kunlun there are several such hiding places. Along the ridge of Altan Tag, whose soil no European foot has ever trodden so far, there exists a certain hamlet, lost in a deep gorge. It is a small cluster of houses, a hamlet rather than a monastery, with a poor-looking temple in it, and one old lama, a hermit, living nearby to watch it. Pilgrims say that the subterranean galleries and halls under it contain a collection of books, the number of which, according to the accounts given, is too large to find room even in the British Museum. According to the same tradition, the now desolate regions of the waterless land of Darim, a veritable wilderness in the heart of Turkestan, were in days of old covered with flourishing and wealthy cities. At present, a few verdant oases only relieve its dread solitude. One such, carpeting the sepulchre of a vast city buried under the sandy soil of the desert, belongs to no one, but is often visited by Mongolians and Buddhists. The tradition also speaks of immense subterranean abodes, of large corridors filled with tiles and cylinders. It may be an idle rumor, and it may be an actual fact. All this will very likely provoke a smile of doubt. But before the reader rejects the truthfulness of the reports, let him pause and reflect over the following well-known facts. The collective researches of Orientalists, and especially of late years the labors of students of comparative philology and the science of religion, have enabled them to ascertain that an incalculable number of manuscripts, and even of printed works known to have existed, are now to be no more found. They have disappeared without leaving the slightest trace behind them. Were they works of no importance they might, in the natural course of time, have been left to perish, and their very names would have been obliterated from human memory. But this is not so, for, as now ascertained, most of them contain the true keys to works still extant, and now entirely incomprehensible, for the greater portion of their readers, without these additional volumes of commentaries and explanations. Such, for instance, are the works of Lao Tse, the predecessor of Confucius. He is said to have written 930 books on ethics and religions, and 70 on magic, 1,000 in all. His great work, however, the Tao Te King, the heart of his doctrine and the sacred scripture of the Tao Sse, has in it, as Stanislas Julian shows, only about 5,000 words, 8 hardly a dozen of pages, yet Professor Max Muller finds that the text is unintelligible without commentaries, so that M. Julian had to consult more than 60 commentators for the purpose of his translation, the earliest going back as far as the year 163 B.C., and not earlier, as we see. During the 4 centuries and a half that preceded this earliest of the commentators there was ample time to veil the true Lao Tse doctrine from all but his initiated priests. The Japanese, among whom are now to be found the most learned of the priests and followers of Lao Tse, simply laugh at the blunders and hypotheses of European Chinese scholars, and tradition affirms that the commentaries to which our Western sinologues have access are not the real occult records, but intentional veils, and that the true commentaries, as well as almost all the texts, have long disappeared from the eyes of the profane. Of the works of Confucius we read, if we turn to China, we find that the religion of Confucius is founded on the 5 King and the 4 Shu books in themselves of considerable extent and surrounded by voluminous commentaries, without which even the most learned scholars would not venture to fathom the depth of their sacred canon. 9. But they have not fathomed it, and this is the complaint of the Confucianists, as a very learned member of that body, in Paris, complained in 1881. If our scholars turn to the ancient literature of the Semitic religions, to the scriptures of Chaldea, the elder sister and instructress, if not the fountainhead of the Mosaic Bible, the basis and starting point of Christianity, what do they find? To perpetuate the memory of the ancient religions of Babylon, to record the vast cycle of astronomical observations of the Chaldean Magi, to justify the tradition of their splendid and preeminently occult literature, what now remains? Only a few fragments, which are said to be by Beresis. These, however, are almost valueless, even as a clue to the character of what has disappeared, for they passed through the hands of His Reverence, the Bishop of Caesarea, that self-constituted censor and editor of the sacred records of other men's religions, and they doubtless to this day bear the mark of his eminently veracious and trustworthy hand. For what is the history of this treatise on the once grand religion of Babylon? It was written in Greek for Alexander the Great, by Beresis, a priest of the Temple of Belus, from the astronomical and chronological records preserved by the priests of that temple, records covering a period of 200,000 years, and is now lost. In the 1st century BC, Alexander Polyhistor made a series of extracts from it, which are also lost. Eusebius, 270 to 340 AD, used these extracts in writing his Chronicon. The points of resemblance, almost of identity, between the Jewish and the Chaldean scriptures, 10 made the latter most dangerous to Eusebius, in his role of defender and champion of the new faith which had adopted the former scriptures and together with them an absurd chronology. Now it is pretty certain that Eusebius did not spare the Egyptian synchronistic tables of Manetho so much so that Bunsen 11 charges him with mutilating history most unscrupulously, and Socrates, a historian of the 5th century, and Syncellus, vice-patriarch of Constantinople in the beginning of the 8th, denounce him as the most daring and desperate forger. Is it likely, then, that he dealt more tenderly with the Chaldean records, which were already menacing the new religion, so rashly accepted? So that, with the exception of these more than doubtful fragments, the entire Chaldean sacred literature has disappeared from the eyes of the profane as completely as the lost Atlantis. A few facts that were contained in the Barrogian history are given later on, and may throw great light on the true origin of the fallen angels, personified by Bel and the dragon. Turning now to the oldest specimen of Aryan literature, the Rig Veda, the student, if he strictly follows in this the data furnished by the Orientalists themselves, will find that although the Rig Veda contains only about 10,580 verses, or 1,028 hymns, yet in spite of the Brahmanas and the mass of glosses and commentaries, it is not understood correctly to this day. Why is this so? Evidently because the Brahmanas, the scholastic and oldest treatises on the primitive hymns, themselves require a key, which the Orientalists have failed to secure. What, again, do the scholars say of Buddhist literature? Do they possess it in its completeness? Assuredly not. Notwithstanding the 325 volumes of the Kanjur and Tanjur of the northern Buddhists, each volume, we are told, weighing from 4 to 5 pounds, nothing, in truth, is known of real Lamaism. Yet the sacred canon is said in the Saddharmalankara 12 to contain 29,368,000 letters, or, exclusive of treatises and commentaries, 5 or 6 times the amount of the matter contained in the Bible, which, as Professor Max Muller states, rejoices in only 3,567,180 letters. Notwithstanding, then, these 325 volumes, in reality there are 333, the Kanjur comprising 108, and Tanjur 225 volumes. The translators, instead of supplying us with correct versions, have interwoven them with their own commentaries, for the purpose of justifying the dogmas of their several schools. 13. Moreover, according to a tradition preserved by the Buddhist schools, both of the South and of the North, the sacred Buddhist canon comprised originally 80,000 or 84,000 tracts, but most of them were lost, so that there remained but 6,000 as the professor tells his audience. Lost, as usual for Europeans. But who can be quite sure that they are likewise lost for Buddhists and Brahmins? Considering the reverence of the Buddhists for every line written upon Buddha and the good law, the loss of nearly 76,000 tracts does seem miraculous. Had it been vice versa, every one acquainted with the natural course of events would subscribe to the statement that, of these 76,000, 5,000 or 6,000 treatises might have been destroyed during the persecutions in, and emigrations from, India. But as it is well ascertained that the Buddhist Arhats began their religious exodus, for the purpose of propagating the new faith beyond Kashmir and the Himalayas, as early as the year 300 before our era, 14 and reached China in the year 61 AD, 15 when Kashyapa, at the invitation of the Emperor Ming Ti, went there to acquaint the Son of Heaven with the tenets of Buddhism. It does seem strange to hear the Orientalists speaking of such a loss as though it were really possible. They do not seem to allow for one moment the possibility that the texts may be lost only for the West and for themselves, or that the Asiatic people should have the unparalleled boldness to keep their most sacred records out of the reach of foreigners, thus refusing to deliver them to the profanation and misuse even of races so vastly superior to themselves. Judging by the expressed regrets and numerous confessions of almost every one of the Orientalists, 16 the public may feel sufficiently sure, a. that the students of ancient religions have indeed very few data upon which to build such final conclusions as they generally do about the old faiths, and b. that such lack of data does not in the least prevent them from dogmatizing. One would imagine that, thanks to the numerous records of the Egyptian theogony and mysteries, preserved in the classics and in a number of ancient writers, the rites and dogmas of pharaonic Egypt, at least, ought to be well understood, better, at any rate, than the two abstruse philosophies and pantheism of India, of whose religion and language Europe had hardly any idea before the beginning of the present century. Along the Nile and on the face of the whole country, there stand to this hour, yearly and daily exhumed, ever fresh relics which eloquently tell their own history. Still it is not so. The learned Oxford philologist himself confesses the truth by saying, "We see still standing the pyramids, and the ruins of temples and labyrinths, their walls covered with hieroglyphic inscriptions, and with the strange pictures of gods and goddesses. On rolls of papyrus, which seem to defy the ravages of time, we have even fragments of what may be called the sacred books of the Egyptians." Yet, though much has been deciphered in the ancient records of the mysterious race, the mainspring of the religion of Egypt and the original intention of its ceremonial worship are far from being fully disclosed to us. 17. Here again the mysterious hieroglyphic documents remain, but the keys by which alone they become intelligible have disappeared. In fact, so little acquainted are our greatest Egyptologists with the funerary rites of the Egyptians and the outward marks of the difference of sex on the mummies, that it has led to the most ludicrous mistakes. Only a year or two ago, one of this kind was discovered at Balak, Cairo. The mummy of what was considered the wife of an unimportant pharaoh, has, thanks to an inscription found on an amulet hung round its neck, turned out to be that of Sesostris, the greatest king of Egypt. Nevertheless, having found that there is a natural connection between language and religion, and that there was a common Aryan religion before the separation of the Aryan race, a common Semitic religion before the separation of the Semitic race, and a common Turanic religion before the separation of the Chinese and the other tribes belonging to the Turanian class, having, in fact, discovered only 3 ancient centers of religion and 3 centers of language, and though as entirely ignorant of those primitive religions and languages as of their origin, the professor does not hesitate to declare that a truly historical basis for a scientific treatment of the principal religions of the world has been gained. A scientific treatment of a subject is no guarantee for its historical basis, and with such scarcity of data on hand, no philologist, even among the most eminent, is justified in giving out his own conclusions for historical facts. No doubt, the eminent Orientalist has thoroughly proved to the world's satisfaction that, according to the phonetic rules of Grimm's Law, Odin and Buddha are 2 different personages, quite distinct from each other, and has proved it scientifically. When, however, he takes the opportunity of saying in the same breath that Odin was worshipped as the supreme deity during a period long anterior to the age of the Veda and of Homer, 18, he has not the slightest historical basis for it, but makes history and fact subservient to his own conclusions, which may be very scientific in the sight of Oriental scholars, but yet very wide of the mark of actual truth. The conflicting views of the various eminent philologists and Orientalists, from Martin Hogg down to Professor Max Muller himself, on the subject of chronology, in the case of the Vedas, are an evident proof that the statement has no historical basis to stand upon, internal evidence being very often a jack-o'-lantern, instead of a safe beacon to follow. Nor has the science of modern comparative mythology any better argument to bring forward to crush the contention of those learned writers who have insisted for the last century or so that there must have been fragments of a primeval revelation, granted to the ancestors of the whole race of mankind, preserved in the temples of Greece and Italy. For this is what all the Eastern initiates and pandits have been proclaiming to the world from time to time. And while a prominent Sinhalese priest assured the writer that it was well known that the most important tracts, belonging to the Buddhist sacred canon, were stored away in countries and places inaccessible to the European pandits, the late Swami Dayanand Sarasvati, the greatest Sanskritist of his day in India, assured some members of the Theosophical Society of the same fact with regard to ancient Brahmanical works. When told that Professor Max Muller had declared to the audiences of his lectures that the theory that there was a primeval preternatural revelation granted to the fathers of the human race, finds but few supporters at present, the holy and learned man laughed. His answer was suggestive. If Mr. Mokshar Muller, as he pronounced the name, were a Brahmin, and came with me, I might take him to a Gyupa cave, a secret crypt near Oki Math, in the Himalayas, where he would soon find out that what crossed the Kalapani, the black waters of the ocean from India to Europe, were only the bits of rejected copies of some passages from our sacred books. There was a primeval revelation, and it still exists, nor will it ever be lost to the world, but will reappear, though the Mlechchas will of course have to wait. Questioned further on the point, he would say no more. This was at Meerut, in 1880. No doubt the mystification played by the Brahmins upon Colonel Wilford and Sir William Jones, in the last century, at Calcutta, was cruel, but it had been well deserved, and no one was more to blame in that affair than the missionaries and Colonel Wilford himself. The former, on the testimony of Sir William Jones himself, 19 were silly enough to maintain that the Hindus were even now almost Christians, because their Brahma, Vishnu and Mahesha were no other than the Christian Trinity. 20 It was a good lesson. It made the Oriental scholars doubly cautious, but perchance it has also made some of them too shy and, in its reaction, has caused the pendulum of foregone conclusions to swing too much the other way. For that first supply from the Brahmanical market, in answer to the demand of Colonel Wilford, has now created an evident necessity and desire in the Orientalists to declare nearly every archaic Sanskrit manuscript so modern as to give the missionaries full justification for availing themselves of their opportunity. That they do so and to the full extent of their mental powers, is shown by the absurd attempts of late to prove that the whole Puranic story about Krishna was plagiarized by the Brahmins from the Bible. But the facts cited by the Oxford professor in his lectures concerning the now famous interpolations, for the benefit, and later on to the sorrow, of Colonel Wilford, do not at all interfere with the conclusions to which one who studies the secret doctrine must unavoidably come. For, if the results show that neither the New nor even the Old Testament borrowed anything from the more ancient religion of the Brahmins and Buddhists, it does not follow that the Jews have not borrowed all they knew from the Chaldean records, the latter being mutilated later on by Eusebius. As to the Chaldeans, they assuredly got their primitive learning from the Brahmins, for Rawlinson shows an undeniably Vedic influence in the early mythology of Babylon, and Colonel Vance Kennedy has long ago justly declared that Babylonia was, from her origin, the seat of Sanskrit and Brahmin learning. But all such proofs must lose their value, in the presence of the latest theory worked out by Professor Max Muller. What it is everyone knows. The Code of Phonetic Laws has now become a universal solvent for every identification and connection between the gods of many nations. Thus, though the mother of Mercury, Buddha, thought Hermes, etc., was Maya, the mother of Gautama Buddha, also Maya, and the mother of Jesus, likewise Maya, illusion, for Mary is Mare, the sea, the great illusion symbolically, yet these three characters have no connection, nor can they have any, since Bob has laid down his code of phonetic laws. In their efforts to collect together the many skeins of unwritten history, it is a bold step for our Orientalists to take, to deny a priori everything that does not dovetail with their special conclusions. Thus, while new discoveries are daily made of great arts and sciences having existed far back in the night of time, yet even the knowledge of writing is refused to some of the most ancient nations, and they are credited with barbarism instead of culture. Nevertheless, traces of an immense civilization, even in Central Asia, are still to be found. This civilization is undeniably prehistoric. And how can there be civilization without a literature in some form, without annals or chronicles? Common sense alone ought to supplement the broken links in the history of departed nations. The gigantic and unbroken wall of the mountains that hem in the whole tableland of Tibet, from the upper course of the river Kwanki down to the Karakoram hills, witnessed a civilization during millenniums of years, and should have strange secrets to tell mankind. The eastern and central portions of these regions, the Nanshan and the Altan Tag, were once upon a time covered with cities that could well vie with Babylon. A whole geological period has swept over the land, since those cities breathed their last, as the mountains of shifting sand and the sterile and now dead soil of the immense central plains of the basin of Darim testify. The borderlands alone are superficially known to the traveler. Within those tablelands of sand there is water, and fresh oases are found blooming there, wherein no European foot has ever yet ventured, or trodden the now treacherous soil. Among these verdant oases there are some which are entirely inaccessible even to the profane native traveler. Hurricanes may tear up the sands and sweep whole plains away, they are powerless to destroy that which is beyond their reach. Built deep in the bowels of the earth, the subterranean stores are secure, and as their entrances are concealed, there is little fear that anyone would discover them, even should several armies invade the sandy wastes where not a pool, not a bush, not a house is seen, and the mountain range forms a rugged screen round the parched flats of the dry desert. But there is no need to send the reader across the desert, when the same proofs of ancient civilization are found even in comparatively populated regions of the same country. The oasis of Churchan, for instance, situated about 4,000 feet above the level of the river Churchan Darya, is now surrounded in every direction by the ruins of archaic towns and cities. There, some 3,000 human beings represent the relics of about 100 extinct nations and races, the very names of which are now unknown to our ethnologists. An anthropologist would feel more than embarrassed to class, divide, and subdivide them, the more so, as the respective descendants of all these antediluvian races and tribes themselves know as little of their own forefathers as if they had fallen from the moon. When questioned about their origin, they reply that they know not whence their fathers had come, but had heard that their first, or earliest, men were ruled by the great genii of these deserts. This may be put down to ignorance and superstition, yet in view of the teachings of the secret doctrine, the answer may be based upon primeval tradition. Alone the tribe of Khorasan claims to have come from what is now known as Afghanistan, long before the days of Alexander, and brings legendary lore to that effect in corroboration. The Russian traveler Colonel, now General, Przhevalsky found quite close to the oasis of Churchan the ruins of two enormous cities, the oldest of which, according to local tradition, was destroyed 3,000 years ago by a hero and giant, and the other by Mongolians in the 10th century of our era. The emplacement of the two cities is now covered, owing to shifting sands and the desert wind, with strange and heterogeneous relics, with broken china and kitchen utensils and human bones. The natives often find copper and gold coins, melted silver ingots, diamonds, and turquoises, and what is the most remarkable, broken glass. Coffins of some undecaying wood, or material, also, within which beautifully preserved embalmed bodies are found. The male mummies are all extremely tall, powerfully built men with long wavy hair. A vault was found with 12 dead men sitting in it. Another time, in a separate coffin, a young girl was discovered by us. Her eyes were closed with golden discs, and the jaws held firm by a golden circlet running from under the chin across the top of the head. Clad in a narrow woolen garment, her bosom was covered with golden stars, the feet being left naked. 21. To this, the famous traveler adds that all along their way on the river Churchen they heard legends about 23 towns buried ages ago by the shifting sands of the deserts. The same tradition exists on the Lob Nor and in the oasis of Kirya. The traces of such civilization, and these and like traditions, give us the right to credit other legendary lore, warranted by well-educated and learned natives of India and Mongolia who speak of immense libraries reclaimed from the sand, together with various relics of ancient magic lore, which have all been safely stowed away. To recapitulate, the secret doctrine was the universally diffused religion of the ancient and prehistoric world. Proofs of its diffusion, authentic records of its history, a complete chain of documents, showing its character and presence in every land, together with the teaching of all its great adepts, exist to this day in the secret crypts of libraries belonging to the occult fraternity. This statement is rendered more credible by a consideration of the following facts: the tradition of the thousands of ancient parchments saved when the Alexandrian library was destroyed, the thousands of Sanskrit works which disappeared in India in the reign of Akbar, the universal tradition in China and Japan that the true ancient texts with the commentaries, which alone make them comprehensible, amounting to many thousands of volumes, have long passed out of the reach of profane hands, the disappearance of the vast sacred and occult literature of Babylon, the loss of those keys which alone could solve the thousand riddles of the Egyptian hieroglyphic records, the tradition in India that the real secret commentaries which alone make the Vedas intelligible, though no longer visible to profane eyes, still remain for the initiate, hidden in secret caves and crypts, and an identical belief among the Buddhists, with regard to their secret books. The occultists assert that all these exist, safe from Western spoliating hands, to reappear in some more enlightened age, for which, in the words of the late Swami Dayanand Sarasvati, the Mlechchas outcasts, savages, those beyond the pale of Aryan civilization will have to wait. For it is not the fault of the initiates that these documents are now lost to the profane, nor was their policy dictated by selfishness, or any desire to monopolize the life-giving sacred lore. There were portions of the secret science that for incalculable ages had to remain concealed from the profane gaze. But this was because the imparting to the unprepared multitude secrets of such tremendous importance was equivalent to giving a child a lighted candle in a powder magazine. The answer to a question which has frequently arisen in the minds of students, when meeting with statements such as this, may well be outlined here. We can understand, they say, the necessity for concealing from the herd such secrets as the vril, or the rock-destroying force, discovered by J.W. Keeley, of Philadelphia, but we cannot understand how any danger could arise from the revelation of such a purely philosophical doctrine, for instance, as the evolution of the planetary chains. The danger was that such doctrines as the planetary chain, or the seven races, at once give a clue to the sevenfold nature of man, for each principle is correlated to a plane, a planet, and a race, and the human principles are, on every plane, correlated to sevenfold occult forces, those of the higher planes being of tremendous power. So that any septenary division at once gives a clue to tremendous occult powers, the abuse of which would cause incalculable evil to humanity, a clue which is, perhaps, no clue to the present generation, especially to Westerns, protected as they are by their very blindness and ignorant materialistic disbelief in the occult, but a clue which would, nevertheless, have been very real in the early centuries of the Christian era to people fully convinced of the reality of occultism, and entering a cycle of degradation which made them rife for abuse of occult powers and sorcery of the worst description. The documents were concealed, it is true, but the knowledge itself and its actual existence was never made a secret of by the hierophants of the temples, wherein the mysteries have ever been made a discipline and stimulus to virtue. This is very old news, and was repeatedly made known by the great adepts, from Pythagoras and Plato down to the Neoplatonists. It was the new religion of the Nazarenes that wrought a change for the worse in the policy of centuries. Moreover, there is a well-known fact, a very curious one, corroborated to the writer by a reverend gentleman attached for years to a Russian embassy, that there are several documents in the St. Petersburg imperial libraries to show that, even so late as the days when Freemasonry and secret societies of mystics flourished without hindrance in Russia, namely at the end of the last and the beginning of the present century, more than one Russian mystic traveled to Tibet via the Ural Mountains in search of knowledge and initiation in the unknown crypts of Central Asia. And more than one returned years later, with a rich store of information such as could never have been given him anywhere in Europe. Several cases could be cited and well-known names brought forward, but for the fact that such publicity might annoy the surviving relatives of the late initiates referred to. Let anyone look over the annals and history of Freemasonry in the archives of the Russian metropolis, and he will assure himself of the fact above stated. This is a corroboration of what has been stated many times before, unfortunately, too indiscreetly. Instead of benefiting humanity, the virulent charges of deliberate invention and imposture with a purpose, hurled at those who asserted a veritable, even if a little known fact, have only generated bad karma for the slanderers. But now the mischief is done, and truth should no longer be denied, whatever the consequences. Is Theosophy a new religion, we are asked? By no means, it is not a religion, nor is its philosophy new, for, as already stated, it is as old as thinking man. Its tenets are not now published for the first time, but have been cautiously given out to, and taught by, more than one European initiate, especially by the late Ragan. More than one great scholar has stated that there never was a religious founder, whether Aryan, Semitic or Turanian, who had invented a new religion, or revealed a new truth. These founders were all transmitters, not original teachers. They were the authors of new forms and interpretations, while the truths upon which their teachings were based were as old as mankind. Thus, out of the many truths revealed orally to man in the beginning, preserved and perpetuated in the addita of the temples through initiation, during the mysteries and by personal transmission, they selected one or more of such grand verities, actualities visible only to the eye of the real sage and seer, and revealed them to the masses. Thus every nation received in its turn some of the said truths, under the veil of its own local and special symbolism, which, as time went on, developed into a more or less philosophical cultus, a pantheon in mythical disguise. Therefore is Confucius, a very ancient legislator in historical chronology, though a very modern sage in the world's history, shown by Dr. Leg 22 to be emphatically a transmitter, not a maker. As he himself says, I only hand on, I cannot create new things. I believe in the ancients and therefore I love them. 23. The writer loves them too, and therefore believes in these ancients, and the modern heirs to their wisdom. And believing in both, she now transmits that which she has received and learnt herself, to all those who will accept it. As to those who may reject her testimony, the great majority she will bear them no malice, for they will be as right in their way in denying, as she is right in hers in affirming, since they look at truth from two entirely different standpoints. Agreeably with the rules of critical scholarship, the Orientalist has to reject a priori whatever evidence he cannot fully verify for himself. And how can a Western scholar accept on hearsay that which he knows nothing about? Indeed, that which is given in these volumes is selected from oral, as much as from written teachings. This first installment of the esoteric doctrines is based upon stanzas, which are the records of a people unknown to ethnology. They are written, it is claimed, in a tongue absent from the nomenclature of languages and dialects with which philology is acquainted, are said to emanate from a source repudiated by science, to wit, occultism, and finally they are offered through an agency, incessantly discredited before the world by all those who hate unwelcome truths, or have some special hobby of their own to defend. Therefore, the rejection of these teachings may be expected, and must be expected beforehand. No one styling himself a scholar, in whatever department of exact science, will permit himself to regard these teachings seriously. They will be derided and rejected a priori in this century, but only in this one. For in the 20th century of our era scholars will begin to recognize that the secret doctrine has neither been invented nor exaggerated, but, on the contrary, simply outlined, and finally that its teachings antedate the Vedas. This is no pretension to prophecy, but simply a statement based on the knowledge of facts. Every century an attempt is being made to show the world that occultism is no vain superstition. Once the door is permitted to remain a little ajar, it will be opened wider with every new century. The times are ripe for a more serious knowledge than hitherto permitted, though still, even now, very limited. For have not even the Vedas been derided, rejected, and called a modern forgery even so recently as 50 years ago? Was not Sanskrit proclaimed at one time the progeny of, and a dialect derived from, the Greek, according to Lempriere and other scholars? About 1820, as Professor Max Muller tells us, the sacred books of the Brahmins, of the Magians, and of the Buddhists, were all but unknown, their very existence was doubted, and there was not a single scholar who could have translated a line of the Veda, of the Zen Avesta, or, of the Buddhist Tripitaka, and now the Vedas are proved to be the work of the highest antiquity, whose preservation amounts almost to a marvel. The same will be said of the secret archaic doctrine, when undeniable proofs are given of its existence and records. But it will be centuries before much more is given from it. Speaking of the keys to the zodiacal mysteries as being almost lost to the world, it was remarked by the writer some 10 years ago in Isis Unveiled that, the said key must be turned 7 times before the whole system is divulged. We will give it but one turn, and thereby allow the profane one glimpse into the mystery. Happy he, who understands the whole. The same may be said of the whole esoteric system. One turn of the key, and no more, was given in Isis Unveiled. Much more is explained in these volumes. In those days the writer hardly knew the language in which the work was written, and the disclosure of many things, freely spoken about now, was forbidden. In century the 20th, some disciple more informed, and far better fitted, may be sent by the masters of wisdom to give final and irrefutable proofs that there exists a science called Gupta Vidya, and that, like the once mysterious sources of the Nile, the source of all religions and philosophies now made known to the world has been for many ages forgotten and lost to men, but it is at last found. Such a work as this has to be introduced with no simple preface, but with a volume, rather one that would give facts, not mere disquisitions, since the secret doctrine is not a treatise, or a series of vague theories, but contains all that can be given out to the world in this century. It would be worse than useless to publish in these pages even those portions of the esoteric teachings that have now escaped from confinement, unless the genuineness and authenticity, or at any rate the probability, of the existence of such teachings were first established. Such statements as will now be made, have to be shown as warranted by various authorities, such as ancient philosophers, classical writers, and even certain learned church fathers, some of whom knew these doctrines because they had studied them, had seen and read works written upon them, and some of whom had even been personally initiated into the ancient mysteries, during the performance of which the arcane doctrines were allegorically enacted. The writer will have to give historical and trustworthy names, and to cite well-known authors, ancient and modern, of recognized ability, good judgment, and truthfulness, as also to name some of the famous proficients in the secret arts and science, together with the mysteries of the latter, as they are divulged, or rather partially presented before the public in their strange archaic form. How is this to be done, what is the best way for achieving such an object, has been the ever-recurring question. To make our plan clearer, an illustration may be attempted. When a tourist, coming from a well-explored country, suddenly reaches the borderland of a terra incognita, hedged in, and shut out from view by a formidable barrier of impassable rocks, he may still refuse to acknowledge himself baffled in his exploratory plans. Ingress beyond is forbidden. But if he cannot visit the mysterious region personally, he may still find a means of examining it from as short a distance as can be arrived at. Helped by his knowledge of the landscapes left behind, he can get a general and pretty correct idea of the transmural view, if he will only climb to the loftiest summit of the altitudes in front of him. Once there, he can gaze at it at his leisure, comparing that which he dimly perceives with that which he has just left below, now that he is, thanks to his own efforts, beyond the line of the mists and the cloud-capped cliffs. Such a point of preliminary observation cannot in these 2 volumes be offered to those who would like to get a more correct understanding of the mysteries of the pre-archaic periods given in the texts. But if the reader has patience, and will glance at the present state of beliefs and creeds in Europe, compare and check it with what is known to history of the ages directly preceding and following the Christian era, then he will find all this in a future volume of the present work. In the latter volume a brief recapitulation will be made of all the principal adepts known to history, and the downfall of the mysteries will be described, after which began the disappearance and the systematic and final elimination from the memory of men of the real nature of initiation and the sacred science. From that time its teachings became occult, and magic sailed but too often under the venerable but frequently misleading name of Hermetic philosophy. As real occultism had been prevalent among the mystics during the centuries that preceded our era, so magic, or rather sorcery, with its occult arts, followed the beginning of Christianity. However great and zealous the fanatical efforts, during these early centuries, to obliterate every trace of the mental and intellectual labor of the pagans, they were a failure, but the same spirit of the dark demon of bigotry and intolerance has ever since systematically perverted every bright page written in the pre-Christian periods. Even history, in her uncertain records, has preserved enough of that which has survived to throw an impartial light upon the whole. Let, then, the reader tarry a little while with the writer on the spot of observation selected. He is asked to give all his attention to that millennium of the pre-Christian and the post-Christian periods, divided by the year 1 of the Nativity. This event, whether historically correct or not, has nevertheless been made to serve as a first signal for the erection of manifold bulwarks against any possible return of, or even a glimpse into, the hated religions of the past, hated and dreaded, because throwing such a vivid light on the novel and intentionally veiled interpretation of what is now known as the New Dispensation. However superhuman the efforts of the early Christian fathers to obliterate the secret doctrine from the very memory of man, they all failed. Truth can never be killed, hence the failure to sweep away entirely from the face of the earth every vestige of that ancient wisdom, and to shackle and gag every witness who testified to it. Let one only think of the thousands, perhaps millions, of manuscripts burnt, of monuments, with their too indiscreet inscriptions and pictorial symbols, pulverized to dust, of the bands of early hermits and ascetics roaming about among the ruined cities of Upper and Lower Egypt, in desert and mountain, valley and highland, seeking for and eager to destroy every obelisk and pillar, scroll, or parchment they could lay their hands on, if only it bore the symbol of the Tao, or any other sign borrowed and appropriated by the new faith, and he will then see plainly how it is that so little has remained of the records of the past. Verily, the fiendish spirit of fanaticism of early and medieval Christianity and of Islam has loved from the first to dwell in darkness and ignorance, and both have made, the sun like blood, the earth a tomb, the tomb a hell, and hell itself a murkier gloom. Both creeds have won their proselytes at the point of the sword, both have built their churches on heaven-kissing hecatombs of human victims. Over the gateway of century I of our era, the ominous words "the Karma of Israel" fatally glowed. Over the portals of our own, the future seer may discern other words, that will point to the karma for cunningly made-up history, for events purposely perverted, and for great characters slandered by posterity, mangled out of recognition, between the two cars of Jagannatha bigotry and materialism, one accepting too much, the other denying all. Wise is he who holds to the golden midpoint, who believes in the eternal justice of things. Says Faiza Diwan, thou witness to the wonderful speeches of a freethinker who belongs to 1,000 sects, in the assembly of the day of resurrection, when past things shall be forgiven, the sins of the Kaaba will be forgiven for the sake of the dust of Christian churches. To this, Professor Max Muller replies, the sins of Islam are as worthless as the dust of Christianity. On the day of resurrection both Mohammedans and Christians will see the vanity of their religious doctrines. Men fight about religion on earth, in heaven they shall find out that there is only one true religion, the worship of God's Spirit. 24. In other words, there is no religion or law higher than truth. Satyat Nasti Paro Dharma, the motto of the Maharaja of Benares, adopted by the Theosophical Society. As already said in the preface, the secret doctrine is not a version of Isis unveiled, as originally intended. It is rather a volume explanatory of the latter, and, though entirely independent of the earlier work, an indispensable corollary to it. Much of what was in the former work could hardly be understood by theosophists in those days. The secret doctrine will now throw light on many a problem left unsolved in the first work, especially on the opening pages, which have never been understood. As it was concerned simply with the philosophies within historical times and the respective symbolism of the fallen nations, only a hurried glance could be thrown at the panorama of occultism in the 2 volumes of Isis. In the present work, detailed cosmogony and the evolution of the 4 races that preceded our 5th race humanity are given, and now 2 large volumes explain that which was stated only on the first page of Isis Unveiled alone, and in a few allusions scattered hither and thither throughout that work. Nor can the vast catalogue of the archaic sciences be attempted in the present volumes, before we have disposed of such tremendous problems as cosmic and planetary evolution, and the gradual development of the mysterious humanities and races that preceded our Adamic humanity. Therefore, the present attempt to elucidate some mysteries of the esoteric philosophy has, in truth, nothing to do with the earlier work. The writer must be allowed to illustrate what is said by an instance. Volume I of Isis begins with a reference to an old book, so very old that our modern antiquarians might ponder over its pages an indefinite time, and still not quite agree as to the nature of the fabric upon which it is written. It is the only original copy now in existence. The most ancient Hebrew document on occult learning, the Sipra Geniauta, was compiled from it, and that at a time when the former was already considered in the light of a literary relic. One of its illustrations represents the divine essence emanating from Adam 25 like a luminous arc proceeding to form a circle, and then, having attained the highest point of its circumference, the ineffable glory bends back again, and returns to earth, bringing a higher type of humanity in its vortex. As it approaches nearer and nearer to our planet, the emanation becomes more and more shadowy, until upon touching the ground it is as black as night. This very old book is the original work from which the many volumes of Qti were compiled. Not only the latter and the Sifra Geniauta, but even the Sefer Yetzirah 26, the work attributed by the Hebrew Kabbalists to their patriarch Abraham, the Shu King, China's primitive Bible, the sacred volumes of the Egyptian Thoth Hermes, the Puranas in India, the Chaldean Book of Numbers and the Pentateuch itself, are all derived from that one small parent volume. Tradition says that it was taken down in Centaur, the secret sacerdotal tongue, from the words of divine beings, who dictated it to the sons of light, in Central Asia, at the very beginning of our 5th race, for there was a time when its language, the Centaur, was known to the initiates of every nation, when the forefathers of the Toltec understood it as easily as the inhabitants of the lost Atlantis, who inherited it, in their turn, from the sages of the third race, the Manishis, who learned it direct from the Devas of the second and first races. The illustration spoken of in Isis relates to the evolution of these races and of our fourth and fifth race humanity in the Vaivasvata Manvantara, or round, each round being composed of the yugas of the 7 periods of humanity, 4 of which are now passed in our life cycle, the middle point of the 5th being nearly reached. This illustration is symbolical, as everyone can well understand, and covers the ground from the beginning. The old book, having described cosmic evolution and explained the origin of everything on Earth, including physical man, after giving the true history of the races, from the first down to our own 5th race, goes no further. It stops short at the beginning of the Kali Yuga, just 4,989 years ago, at the death of Krishna, the bright sun god, the once living hero and reformer. But there exists another book. None of its possessors regard it as very ancient, as it was born with, and is only as old as the Black Age, namely, about 5,000 years. In about 9 years hence, the first cycle of the first 5 millenniums, that began with the great cycle of the Kali Yuga, will end. And then the last prophecy contained in that book, the first volume of the prophetic record for the Black Age, will be accomplished. We have not long to wait, and many of us will witness the dawn of the new cycle, at the end of which not a few accounts will be settled and squared between the races. Volume 2 of the prophecies is nearly ready, having been in preparation since the time of Buddha's grand successor, Shankaracharya. One more important point must be noticed, one that stands foremost in the series of proofs given of the existence of one primeval, universal wisdom, at any rate for Christian Kabbalists and students. The teachings were, at least, partially known to several of the Fathers of the Church. It is maintained, on purely historical grounds, that Origen, Cynesus, and even Clemens Alexandrinus, had themselves been initiated into the mysteries before adding to the Neoplatonism of the Alexandrian school that of the Gnostics, under the Christian veil. More than this, some of the doctrines of the secret schools, though by no means all, were preserved in the Vatican, and have since become part and parcel of the mysteries, in the shape of disfigured additions made to the original Christian program by the Latin Church. Such is the now materialized dogma of the Immaculate Conception. This accounts for the great persecutions set on foot by the Roman Catholic Church against occultism, Masonry, and heterodox mysticism generally. The days of Constantine were the last turning point in history, the period of the supreme struggle, that ended in the Western world throttling the old religions in favor of the new one, built on their bodies. From thence the vista into the far distant past, beyond the deluge and the Garden of Eden, began to be forcibly and relentlessly shut out by every fair and unfair means from the indiscreet gaze of posterity. Every issue was blocked up, every record upon which hands could be laid, destroyed. Yet there remains enough, even among such mutilated records, to warrant us in saying that there is in them every requisite evidence of the actual existence of apparent doctrine. Fragments have survived geological and political cataclysms, to tell the story, and every survival shows evidence that the now secret wisdom was once the one fountainhead, the ever-flowing perennial source, from which were fed all the streamlets, the later religions of all nations from the first down to the last. This period, beginning with Buddha and Pythagoras at the one end and finishing with the Neoplatonists and Gnostics at the other, is the only focus left in history wherein converge for the last time the bright rays of light streaming from the eons of times gone by, unobscured by the hand of bigotry and fanaticism. This accounts for the necessity under which the writer has labored of ever explaining the facts given from the hoariest past by evidence gathered from the historical period, even at the risk of being once more charged with a lack of method and system. No other means was at hand. The public must be made acquainted with the efforts of many world adepts, of initiated poets and writers in the classics of every age, to preserve in the records of humanity the knowledge at least of the existence of such a philosophy, if not actually of its tenets. The initiates of 1888 would indeed remain incomprehensible and even a seemingly impossible myth, were not like initiates shown to have lived in every other age of history. This could be done only by naming chapter and verse where mention may be found of these great characters, who were preceded and followed by a long and interminable line of other famous antediluvian and post-diluvian masters in the arts. Thus only could it be shown, on semi-traditional and semi-historical authority, that occult knowledge and the powers it confers on man, are not altogether fictions, but that they are as old as the world itself. To my judges, past and future, therefore, whether they are serious literary critics, or those howling dervishes in literature who judge a book according to the popularity or unpopularity of the author's name, who, hardly glancing at its contents, fasten like lethal bacilli on the weakest points of the body, I have nothing to say. Nor shall I condescend to notice those crack-brained slanderers, fortunately very few in number, who, hoping to attract public attention by throwing discredit on every writer whose name is better known than their own, foam and bark at their very shadows. These, having first maintained for years that the doctrines taught in the Theosophist, and which culminated in esoteric Buddhism, had been all invented by the present writer, have finally turned round, and denounced Isis unveiled and the rest as a plagiarism from Eliphas Levi, Paracelsus, and, mirabile dictu, Buddhism and Brahmanism. As well charge Rana with having stolen his via to Jesus from the Gospels, and Max Muller his sacred books of the East or his chips from the philosophies of the Brahmins and of Gautama, the Buddha. But to the public in general and the readers of the secret doctrine I may repeat what I have stated all along, and which I now clothe in the words of Montaigne: Gentlemen, I have here made only a nosegay of cold flowers, and have brought nothing of my own but the string that ties them. Pull the string to pieces and cut it up in shreds, if you will. As for the nosegay of facts, you will never be able to make away with these. You can only ignore them, and no more. We may close with a parting word concerning this first volume. In an introduction prefacing chapters dealing chiefly with cosmogony, certain subjects brought forward may be deemed out of place, but one more consideration added to those already given has led me to touch upon them. Every reader will inevitably judge the statements made from the standpoint of his own knowledge, experience, and consciousness, basing his judgment on what he has already learnt. This fact the writer is constantly obliged to bear in mind, hence, also the frequent references in this first volume to matters which, properly speaking, belong to a later part of the work, but which could not be passed by in silence, lest the reader should look upon it as a fairy tale, indeed a fiction of some modern brain. Thus, the past shall help to realize the present, and the latter to better appreciate the past. The errors of the day must be explained and swept away, yet it is more than probable, nay, in the present case it amounts to certitude, that once more the testimony of long ages and of history will fail to impress any but the very intuitional, which is equal to saying the very few. But in this, as in all like cases, the true and the faithful may console themselves by presenting the skeptical modern Sadducee with the mathematical proof and memorial of his obdurate obstinacy and bigotry. There still exists somewhere in the archives of the French Academy, the famous law of probabilities worked out by certain mathematicians for the benefit of skeptics by an algebraical process. It runs thus: if two persons give their evidence to a fact, and thus impart to it each of them 5/6 of certitude, that fact will have then 35/36 of certitude, i.e., its probability will bear to its improbability the ratio of 35 to 1. If three such evidences are joined together, the certitude will become 215/216. The agreement of 10 persons giving each 1/2 of certitude will produce 1023/1024, etc., etc. The occultist may remain satisfied with such certitude, and care for no more. Proem, pages from a prehistoric record. An archaic manuscript, a collection of palm leaves made impermeable to water, fire, and air, by some specific and unknown processes before the writer's eye. On the first page is an immaculate white disk within a dull black ground. On the following page, the same disk, but with a central point. The first, the student knows, represents cosmos in eternity, before the reawakening of still slumbering energy, the emanation of the world in later systems. The point in the hitherto immaculate disk, space, and eternity in Pralaya, denotes the dawn of differentiation. It is the point in the mundane egg, the germ within it which will become the universe, the all, the boundless, periodical cosmos, a germ which is latent and active, periodically and by turns. The one circle is divine unity, from which all proceeds, whither all returns, its circumference a forcibly limited symbol, in view of the limitation of the human mind indicates the abstract, ever incognizable presence, and its plane, the universal soul, although the two are one. Only, the face of the disk being white, and the surrounding ground black, clearly shows that its plane is the soul knowledge, dim and hazy though it still is, that is attainable by man. It is on this plane that the manvantaric manifestations begin, for it is in this soul, that slumbers, during the pralaya, the divine thought, 27 wherein lies concealed the plan of every future cosmogony and theogony. It is the one life, eternal, invisible, yet omnipresent, without beginning or end, yet periodical in its regular manifestations between which periods reigns the dark mystery of non-being, unconscious, yet absolute consciousness, unrealizable, yet the one self-existing reality, truly, a chaos to the sense, a cosmos to the reason. Its one absolute attribute, which is itself, eternal, ceaseless motion, is called in esoteric parlance the Great Breath, 28, which is the perpetual motion of the universe, in the sense of limitless, ever-present space. That which is motionless cannot be divine. But then there is nothing in fact and reality absolutely motionless within the universal soul. Almost 5 centuries BC, Leucippus, the instructor of Democritus, maintained that space was eternally filled with atoms actuated by a ceaseless motion, which, in due course of time, as they aggregated, generated rotatory motion, through mutual collisions producing lateral movements. Epicurus and Lucretius taught the same doctrine, adding however to the lateral motion of the atoms the idea of affinity in occult teaching. From the beginning of man's inheritance, from the first appearance of the architects of the globe he lives on, the unrevealed deity was recognized and considered under its only philosophical aspect universal motion, the thrill of the creative breath in nature. Occultism sums up the one existence thus: deity is an arcane, living or moving fire, and the eternal witnesses to this unseen presence are light, heat, moisture, this trinity including, and being the cause of, every phenomenon in nature. 29 Intracosmic motion is eternal and ceaseless, cosmic motion the visible, or that which is subject to perception is finite and periodical. As an eternal abstraction it is the ever-present, as a manifestation, it is finite both in the coming direction and the opposite, the two being the alpha and omega of successive reconstructions. Cosmos the noumenon has not to do with the causal relations of the phenomenal world. It is only with reference to the intracosmic soul, the ideal cosmos in the immutable divine thought, that we may say, it never had a beginning nor will it have an end. With regard to its body or cosmic organization, though it cannot be said that it had a first, or will ever have a last construction, yet at each new manvantara, its organization may be regarded as the first and the last of its kind, as it evolves every time on a higher plane. A few years ago only, it was stated that, the esoteric doctrine, like Buddhism and Brahmanism, and even Kabbalism, teaches that the one infinite and unknown essence exists from all eternity, and in regular and harmonious successions is either passive or active. In the poetical phraseology of Manu these conditions are called the days and the nights of Brahma. The latter is either awake or asleep. The Svabhavikas, or philosophers of the oldest school of Buddhism, which still exists in Nepal, speculate only upon the active condition of this essence, which they call Svabhavit, and deem it foolish to theorize upon the abstract and unknowable power in its passive condition. Hence they are called atheists by both Christian theologians and modern scientists, for neither of the two are able to understand the profound logic of their philosophy. The former will allow of no other God than the personified secondary powers which have worked out the visible universe, and which becomes with them the anthropomorphic God of the Christians, the male Jehovah, roaring amid thunder and lightning. In its turn, rationalistic science greets the Buddhists and the Svabhavikas as the positivists of the archaic ages. If we take a one-sided view of the philosophy of the latter, our materialists may be right in their own way. The Buddhists maintain that there is no creator, but an infinitude of creative powers, which collectively form the one eternal substance, the essence of which is inscrutable, hence not a subject for speculation for any true philosopher. Socrates invariably refused to argue upon the mystery of universal being, yet no one would ever have thought of charging him with atheism, except those who were bent upon his destruction. Upon inaugurating an active period, says the secret doctrine, an expansion of this divine essence from without inwardly and from within outwardly, occurs in obedience to eternal and immutable law, and the phenomenal or visible universe is the ultimate result of the long chain of cosmical forces thus progressively set in motion. In like manner, when the passive condition is resumed, a contraction of the divine essence takes place, and the previous work of creation is gradually and progressively undone. The visible universe becomes disintegrated, its material dispersed, and darkness solitary and alone, broods once more over the face of the deep. To use a metaphor from the secret books, which will convey the idea still more clearly, an outbreathing of the unknown essence produces the world, and an inhalation causes it to disappear. This process has been going on from all eternity, and our present universe is but one of an infinite series, which had no beginning and will have no end. 30. This passage will be explained, as far as it is possible, in the present work. Though it contains nothing new to the Orientalist, as it now stands, its esoteric interpretation may contain a good deal which has hitherto remained entirely unknown to the Western student. The first illustration is a plain disk, circle. The second in the archaic symbol shows a disk with a point in it, circle with dot. The first differentiation in the periodical manifestations of the ever-eternal nature, sexless and infinite, oddity in that, 31 or potential space within abstract space. In its third stage the point is transformed into a diameter, circle with line. It now symbolizes a divine immaculate Mother Nature within the all-embracing absolute infinitude. When the horizontal diameter is crossed by a vertical one, circle with cross, it becomes the mundane cross. Humanity has reached its third root race, it is the sign for the origin of human life. When the circumference disappears and leaves only the cross, it is a sign that the fall of man into matter is accomplished, and the fourth race begins. The cross within a circle symbolizes pure pantheism. When the cross is left uninscribed, it becomes phallic. It had the same and yet other meanings as a tau inscribed within a circle, circle with lines, tau, or as a Thor's hammer, the so-called Jaina cross, or svastika, within a circle, circle with swastika. By the third symbol, the circle divided in two by a horizontal diameter was meant the first manifestation of creative nature, still passive, because feminine. The first shadowy perception of man connected with procreation is feminine, because man knows his mother more than his father. Hence female deities were more sacred than male. Nature is therefore feminine, and, to a degree, objective and tangible, and the spirit principle which fructifies it, is concealed. 32. By adding to the horizontal line in the circle, a perpendicular, the tau was formed, t, the oldest form of the letter. It was the glyph of the third root race to the day of its symbolical fall, i.e., when the separation of sexes by natural evolution took place, when the figure became circle with vertical line, or sexless life modified or separated a double glyph or symbol. With the sub-races of our fifth race it became in symbology the Sukr, and in Hebrew Enkabva, of the first formed races, 33. Then it changed into the Egyptian emblem of life, Ankh, and still later into the sign of Venus, female symbol. Then comes the swastika, Thor's hammer, now the Hermetic cross, entirely separated from its circle, thus becoming purely phallic. The esoteric symbol of Kali Yuga is the five-pointed star reversed, with its 2 points, horns, turned heavenward, thus five-pointed star, the sign of human sorcery, a position every occultist will recognize as one of the left hand, and used in ceremonial magic. It is hoped that during the perusal of this work the erroneous ideas of the public in general with regard to pantheism will be modified. It is wrong and unjust to regard the Buddhists and Advaitin occultists as atheists. If not all of them philosophers, they are, at any rate, all logicians, their objections and arguments being based on strict reasoning. Indeed, if the Parabrahman of the Hindus may be taken as a representative of the hidden and nameless deities of other nations, this absolute principle will be found to be the prototype from which all the others were copied. Parabrahman is not God, because it is not a God. It is that which is supreme, and not supreme, Paravara. 34. It is supreme as cause, not supreme as effect. Parabrahman is simply, as a secondless reality, the all-inclusive cosmos, or rather the infinite cosmic space in the highest spiritual sense, of course. Brahman, neuter, being the unchanging, pure, free, undecaying supreme root, the one true existence, Paramarthika, and the absolute Chit and Chaitanya, intelligence, consciousness, cannot be a cognizer, for that can have no subject of cognition. Can the flame be called the essence of fire? This essence is the life and light of the universe. The visible fire and flame are destruction, death, and evil. Fire and flame destroy the body of an arhat, their essence makes him immortal. 35. The knowledge of the Absolute Spirit, like the effulgence of the sun, or like heat in fire, is not else than the Absolute Essence itself, says Shankaracharya. It is the spirit of the fire, not fire itself. Therefore, the attributes of the latter, heat or flame, are not the attributes of the spirit, but of that of which that spirit is the unconscious cause. Is not the above sentence the true keynote of later Rosicrucian philosophy? Parabrahman is, in short, the collective aggregate of cosmos in its infinity and eternity, the that and this to which distributive aggregates cannot be applied. 36. In the beginning this was the Self, one only. 37. And the great Shankaracharya explains that this refers to the universe, Jagat, the words, in the beginning, meaning before the reproduction of the phenomenal universe. Therefore, when the pantheists echo the Upanishads, which state, as in the secret doctrine, that this cannot create, they do not deny a creator, or rather a collective aggregate of creators, they simply refuse, very logically, to attribute creation and especially formation something finite to an infinite principle. With them, Parabrahman is a passive because an absolute cause, the unconditioned Mutta. It is only limited omniscience and omnipotence that are refused to the latter, because these are still attributes, reflected in man's perceptions, and because Parabrahman, being the supreme all, the ever-invisible spirit and soul of nature, changeless and eternal, can have no attributes, the term absoluteness very naturally precluding any idea of the finite or conditioned from being connected with it. And if the Vedantins postulate attributes as belonging simply to its emanation, calling it Ishvara plus Maya, and avidya, agnosticism and nescience rather than ignorance, it is difficult to find any atheism in this conception. 38 Since there can be neither two infinites nor two absolutes in a universe supposed to be boundless, this self-existence can hardly be conceived of as creating personally. To the senses and in the perceptions of finite beings, that is non-being, in the sense that it is the one beingness, for, in this all lies concealed its co-eternal and coeval emanation or inherent radiation, which, becoming periodically Brahma, the male-female potency, expands itself into the manifested universe. Narayana, moving on the abstract waters of space, is transformed into the waters of concrete substance moved by him, who now becomes the manifested word or logos. The orthodox Brahmins, those who rise the most against the pantheists and Advaitins, calling them atheists, are forced, if Manu is any authority in this matter, to accept the death of Brahma, the creator, at the expiration of every age of this deity 100 divine years, a period which in our years requires 15 figures to express. Yet no philosopher among them will view this death in any other sense than as a temporary disappearance from the manifested plane of existence, or as a periodical rest. The occultists are, therefore, at one with the Advaita Vedantin philosophers as to the above tenet. They show, on philosophical grounds, the impossibility of accepting the idea of the absolute all-creating or even evolving the golden egg, into which it is said to enter in order to transform itself into Brahma, the creator, who later expands himself into the gods and all the visible universe. They say that absolute unity cannot pass to infinity, for infinity presupposes the limitless extension of something, and the duration of that something, and the one all like space, which is its only mental and physical representation on this earth, or our plane of existence, is neither an object of, nor a subject to, perception. If one could suppose the eternal infinite all, the omnipresent unity, instead of being in eternity, becoming through periodical manifestation a manifold universe or a multiple personality, that unity would cease to be one. Locke's idea, that pure space is capable of neither resistance nor motion, is incorrect. Space is neither a limitless void, nor a conditioned fullness, but both. Being on the plane of absolute abstraction the ever-incognizable deity, which is void only to finite minds, 39 and on that of Mayavic perception, the plenum, the absolute container of all that is, whether manifested or unmanifest, it is, therefore, that absolute all. There is no difference between the Christian apostles in him we live and move and have our being, and the Hindu rishis the universe lives in, proceeds from, and will return to, Brahma, for Brahman, neuter, the unmanifest, is that universe in abscondito, and Brahma, the manifested, is the logos, made male-female 40 in the symbolical orthodox dogmas, the god of the apostle initiate and of the rishi being both the unseen and the visible space. Space is called, in esoteric symbolism, the seven-skinned eternal Mother-Father. From its undifferentiated to its differentiated surface it is composed of 7 layers. What is that which was, is, and will be, whether there is a universe or not, whether there be gods or none, asks the esoteric Centaur Catechism. And the answer made is space. It is not the one unknown ever-present God in nature, or nature in abscondito, that is rejected, but the God of human dogma, and his humanized word. Man, in his infinite conceit and inherent pride and vanity, shaped it himself with his sacrilegious hand out of the material he found in his own small brain fabric, and forced it upon his fellows as a direct revelation from the one unrevealed space. 41 The occultist accepts revelation as coming from divine yet still finite beings, the manifested lives, never from the unmanifestable one life, from those entities, called primordial man, Dhyani Buddhas, or Dhyan Kohans, the Rishi Prajapati of the Hindus, the Elohim or sons of God of the Jews, the planetary spirits of all nations, who have become gods for men. The occultist also regards the Adi Shakti, the direct emanation of Malaprakriti, the eternal root of that, and the female aspect of the creative cause, Brahma, in her akashic form of the universal soul as philosophically a Maya, and cause of human Maya. But this view does not prevent him from believing in its existence so long as it lasts, to wit, for one Mahamanvantara, nor from applying Akasha, the radiation of Malaprakriti, 42 to practical purposes, connected as this world soul is with all natural phenomena known or unknown to science. The oldest religions of the world exoterically, for the esoteric root or foundation is one, are the Indian, the Mazdean, and the Egyptian. Next comes the Chaldean, the outcome of these, now entirely lost to the world, except in its disfigured Sabaeanism as at present rendered by the archaeologists. Then, passing over a number of religions that will be mentioned later, comes the Jewish, esoterically following in the line of Babylonian magism, as in the Kabbalah, exoterically, a collection of allegorical legends, as in Genesis and the Pentateuch. Read by the light of the Zohar, the 4 initial chapters of Genesis are the fragment of a highly philosophical page in the world's cosmogony. Left in their symbolical disguise, they are a nursery tale, an ugly thorn in the side of science and logic, an evident effect of karma. To let them serve as a prologue to Christianity was a cruel revenge on the part of the rabbis, who knew better what their Pentateuch meant. It was a silent protest against their spoliation, and the Jews have now certainly the better of their traditional persecutors. The above-named exoteric creeds will be explained in the light of the universal doctrine as we proceed. The occult catechism contains the following questions and answers: what is it that ever is? Space, the eternal anupadaka parentless. What is it that ever was? The germ in the root. What is it that is ever coming and going? The great breath. Then, there are 3 eternals, no, the 3 are one. That which ever is one, that which ever was is one, that which is ever being and becoming is also one, and this is space. Explain, O Lanua disciple. The one is an unbroken circle ring with no circumference, for it is nowhere and everywhere. The one is the boundless plane of the circle, manifesting a diameter only during the Manvantaric periods. The one is the indivisible point found nowhere, perceived everywhere during those periods. It is the vertical and the horizontal, the father and the mother, the summit and base of the father, the 2 extremities of the mother, reaching in reality nowhere, for the one is. The ring is also the rings that are within that ring. Light in darkness and darkness in light, the breath which is eternal. It proceeds from without inwardly, when it is everywhere, and from within outwardly, when it is nowhere, i.e., Maya, 43 one of the centers. 44 It expands and contracts exhalation and inhalation. When it expands, the mother diffuses and scatters, when it contracts, the mother draws back and ingathers. This produces the periods of evolution and dissolution, Manvantara and Pralaya. The germ is invisible and fiery, the root, the plane of the circle, is cool, but during evolution and Manvantara her garment is cold and radiant. Hot breath is the father who devours the progeny of the many-faced element heterogeneous, and leaves the single-faced ones homogeneous. Cool breath is the mother, who conceives, forms, brings forth, and receives them back into her bosom, to reform them at the dawn of the day of Brahma, or Manvantara. For clearer understanding on the part of the general reader, it must be stated that occult science recognizes 7 cosmic elements, 4 entirely physical, and the 5th, ether, semi-material, which will become visible in the air towards the end of our 4th round, to reign supreme over the others during the whole of the 5th. The remaining 2 are as yet absolutely beyond the range of human perception. They will, however, appear as presentments during the 6th and 7th races of this round, and will be fully known in the 6th and 7th rounds respectively. 45 These 7 elements with their numberless sub-elements, which are far more numerous than those known to science, are simply conditional modifications and aspects of the one and only element. This latter is not ether, 46 not even akasha, but the source of these. The fifth element, now quite freely advocated by science, is not the ether hypothesized by Sir Isaac Newton, although he calls it by that name, having probably associated it in his mind with ether, the father-mother of antiquity. As Newton Intuition Ally says, nature is a perpetual circulatory worker, generating fluids out of solids, fixed things out of volatile, and volatile out of fixed, subtle out of gross, and gross out of subtle. Thus, perhaps, may all things be originated from ether. 47. The reader has to bear in mind that the stanzas treat only of the cosmogony of our own planetary system and of what is visible around it, after a solar pralaya. The secret teachings with regard to the evolution of the universal cosmos cannot be given, since they could not be understood by even the highest minds in this age, and there seem to be very few initiates, even among the greatest, who are allowed to speculate upon this subject. Moreover, the teachers say openly that not even the highest Dhyanikohans have ever penetrated the mysteries beyond those boundaries that separate the milliards of solar systems from the central sun, as it is called. Therefore, that which is given relates only to our visible cosmos, after a night of Brahma. Before the reader proceeds to the consideration of the stanzas from the Book of Jin which form the basis of the present work, it is absolutely necessary that he should be made acquainted with the few fundamental conceptions which underlie and pervade the entire system of thought to which his attention is invited. These basic ideas are few in number, but on their clear apprehension depends the understanding of all that follows. Therefore no apology is required for asking the reader to make himself familiar with these first, before entering on the perusal of the work itself. The secret doctrine, then, establishes three fundamental propositions: an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle, on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and can only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought, in the words of the Manjukya, unthinkable and unspeakable. To render these ideas clearer to the general reader, let him set out with the postulate that there is one absolute reality which antecedes all manifested, conditioned being. This infinite and eternal cause dimly formulated in the unconscious and unknowable of current European philosophy is the rootless root of all that was, is, or ever shall be. It is of course devoid of all attributes and is essentially without any relation to manifested, finite being. It is beingness rather than being, sat in Sanskrit, and is beyond all thought or speculation. This beingness is symbolized in the secret doctrine under two aspects. On the one hand, absolute abstract space, representing bare subjectivity, the one thing which no human mind can either exclude from any conception, or conceive of by itself. On the other, absolute abstract motion representing unconditioned consciousness. Even our Western thinkers have shown that consciousness is inconceivable to us apart from change, and motion best symbolizes change, its essential characteristic. This latter aspect of the one reality is also symbolized by the term the Great Breath, a symbol sufficiently graphic to need no further elucidation. Thus, then, the first fundamental axiom of the secret doctrine is this metaphysical one absolute beingness symbolized by finite intelligence as the theological Trinity. It may, however, assist the student if a few further explanations are here given. Herbert Spencer has of late so far modified his agnosticism, as to assert that the nature of the first cause, 48, which the occultist more logically derives from the causeless cause, the eternal, and the unknowable, may be essentially the same as that of the consciousness which wells up within us, in short, that the impersonal reality pervading the cosmos is the pure noumenon of thought. This advance on his part brings him very near to the esoteric and Vedantin tenet. 49. Parabrahman, the one reality, the absolute, is the field of absolute consciousness, i.e., that essence which is out of all relation to conditioned existence, and of which conscious existence is a conditioned symbol. But once that we pass in thought from this, to us, absolute negation, duality supervenes in the contrast of spirit, or consciousness, and matter, subject and object. Spirit, or consciousness, and matter are, however, to be regarded, not as independent realities, but as the two symbols or aspects of the Absolute, Parabrahman, which constitute the basis of conditioned being, whether subjective or objective. Considering this metaphysical triad as the root from which proceeds all manifestation, the Great Breath assumes the character of pre-cosmic ideation. It is the fons et origo of force and of all individual consciousness, and supplies the guiding intelligence in the vast scheme of cosmic evolution. On the other hand, pre-cosmic root substance, Malaprakriti, is that aspect of the Absolute which underlies all the objective planes of nature. Just as pre-cosmic ideation is the root of all individual consciousness, so pre-cosmic substance is the substratum of matter in the various grades of its differentiation. Hence it will be apparent that the contrast of these two aspects of the Absolute is essential to the existence of the manifested universe. Apart from cosmic substance, cosmic ideation could not manifest as individual consciousness, since it is only through a vehicle, upati, of matter that consciousness wells up as I am I, a physical basis being necessary to focus a ray of the universal mind at a certain stage of complexity. Again, apart from cosmic ideation, cosmic substance would remain an empty abstraction, and no emergence of consciousness could ensue. The manifested universe, therefore, is pervaded by duality, which is, as it were, the very essence of its existence as manifestation. But just as the opposite poles of subject and object, spirit and matter, are but aspects of the one unity in which they are synthesized, so, in the manifested universe, there is that which links spirit to matter, subject to object. This something, at present unknown to Western speculation, is called by occultists Fahat. It is the bridge by which the ideas existing in the divine thought are impressed on cosmic substance as the laws of nature. Fahat is thus the dynamic energy of cosmic ideation, or, regarded from the other side, it is the intelligent medium, the guiding power of all manifestation, the thought divine transmitted and made manifest through the Dhyan Kohans, 50 the architects of the visible world. Thus from spirit, or cosmic ideation, comes our consciousness, from cosmic substance the several vehicles in which that consciousness is individualized and attains to self or reflective consciousness, while Fahat, in its various manifestations, is the mysterious link between mind and matter, the animating principle electrifying every atom into life. The following summary will afford a clearer idea to the reader. 1. Absoluteness, the Parabrahman of the Vedantins or the One Reality, Sat, which is, as Hegel says, both absolute being and non-being. 2. The first Logos, the impersonal, and, in philosophy, unmanifest Logos, the precursor of the manifested. This is the first cause, the unconscious of European pantheists. 3. The second Logos, spirit matter, life, the spirit of the universe, Purusha and Prakriti. 4. The third Logos, cosmic ideation, Maha or intelligence, the universal world soul, the cosmic noumenon of matter, the basis of the intelligent operations in and of nature, also called Mahabuddhi. The one reality, its dual aspects in the conditioned universe. Further, the secret doctrine affirms, 2. The eternity of the universe in toto as a boundless plane, periodically the playground of numberless universes incessantly manifesting and disappearing, called the manifesting stars, and the sparks of eternity. The eternity of the Pilgrim 51 is like a wink of the eye of self-existence, as the Book of Dizan puts it. The appearance and disappearance of worlds is like a regular tidal ebb of flux and reflux. This second assertion of the secret doctrine is the absolute universality of that law of periodicity, of flux and reflux, ebb and flow, which physical science has observed and recorded in all departments of nature. An alternation such as that of day and night, life and death, sleeping and waking, is a fact so common, so perfectly universal and without exception, that it is easy to comprehend that in it we see one of the absolutely fundamental laws of the universe. Moreover, the secret doctrine teaches 3. The fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul, the latter being itself an aspect of the unknown root, and the obligatory pilgrimage for every soul a spark of the former through the cycle of incarnation, or necessity, in accordance with cyclic and karmic law, during the whole term. In other words, no purely spiritual Buddhai, divine soul, can have an independent conscious existence before the spark which issued from the pure essence of the universal sixth principle or the oversoul has, a. passed through every elemental form of the phenomenal world of that manvantara, and b. acquired individuality, first by natural impulse, and then by self-induced and self-devised efforts, checked by its karma, thus ascending through all the degrees of intelligence, from the lowest to the highest manas, from mineral and plant, up to the holiest archangel, Dhyani Buddha. The pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or special gifts in man, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit throughout a long series of metempsychoses and reincarnations. This is why the Hindus say that the universe is Brahman and Brahma, for Brahman is in every atom of the universe, the six principles in nature being all the outcome the variously differentiated aspects of the seventh and one, the only reality in the universe whether cosmic or microcosmic, and also why the permutations, psychic, spiritual and physical, on the plane of manifestation and form, of the sixth, Brahma the vehicle of Brahman, are viewed by metaphysical antiphrasis as elusive and Mayavic. For although the root of every atom individually and of every form collectively, is that seventh principle or the one reality, still, in its manifested phenomenal and temporary appearance, it is no better than an evanescent illusion of our senses. In its absoluteness, the one principle under its two aspects, Para-Brahman and Malaprakriti, is sexless, unconditioned and eternal. Its periodical manvantaric emanation, or primal radiation, is also one, androgynous and phenomenally finite. When the radiation radiates in its turn, all its radiations are also androgynous, to become male and female principles in their lower aspects. After pralaya, whether the great or minor pralaya, the latter leaving the worlds in statu quo 52, the first that reawakes to active life is the plastic akasha, father-mother, the spirit and soul of ether, or the plane of the circle. Space is called the mother before its cosmic activity, and father-mother at the first stage of reawakening. In the Kabbalah it is also father-mother-son. But whereas in the Eastern doctrine, these are the seventh principle of the manifested universe, or its Atma-Buddhaimanas, spirit-soul intelligence, the triad branching off and dividing into 7 cosmical and 7 human principles. In the Western Kabbalah of the Christian mystics it is the triad or trinity, and with their occultists, the male-female Jehovah, Yahava. In this lies the whole difference between the esoteric and the Christian trinities. The mystics and the philosophers, the Eastern and Western pantheists, synthesize their pregenetic triad in the pure divine abstraction. The Orthodox anthropomorphize it. Hiranyagarbha, Hari, and Shankara, the three hypostases of the manifesting spirit of the Supreme Spirit, by which title Prithivi, the earth, greets Vishnu in his first avatara, are the purely metaphysical abstract qualities of formation, preservation, and destruction, and are the three divine avasthas, hypostases, of that which does not perish with created things, Akyata, a name of Vishnu, whereas the Orthodox Christian separates his personal creative deity into the three personages of the Trinity, and admits of no higher deity. The latter, in occultism, is the abstract triangle, with the orthodox, the perfect cube. The creative god or the aggregate gods are regarded by the Eastern philosopher as bitrantidurshanatta, false appearances, something conceived of, by reason of erroneous appearances, as a material form, and explained as arising from the elusive conception of the egotistic personal and human soul, lower fifth principle. It is beautifully expressed in a revised translation in Fitz-Edward Hall's notes to Wilson's translation of the Vishnu Purana. That Brahma in its totality, has essentially the aspect of Prakriti, both evolved and unevolved Malaprakriti, and also the aspect of spirit and the aspect of time. Spirit, O twice born, is the leading aspect of the Supreme Brahma. 53. The next is a twofold aspect Prakriti, both evolved and unevolved, and time is the last. Cronus is shown in the Orphic Theogony also as being a generated god or agent. At this stage of the reawakening of the universe, the sacred symbolism represents it as a perfect circle with the point, root, in the center. This sign was universal, therefore we find it in the Kabbalah also. The Western Kabbalah, however, now in the hands of Christian mystics, ignores it altogether, though it is plainly shown in the Zohar. These sectarians begin at the end, and give, as the symbol of pregenitic cosmos, cross, calling it the union of the rose and cross, the great mystery of occult generation, from whence the name Rosicrucian, rose cross. This may be seen from one of the most important and best known of their symbols, one which has never been hitherto understood even by modern mystics. It is that of the pelican tearing open its breast to feed its 7 little ones, the real creed of the Brothers of the Rosy Cross and a direct outcome from the Eastern secret doctrine. Brahman, neuter, is called Kalahamsa, meaning, as explained by Western Orientalists, the eternal swan, or goose, and so is Brahma, the creator. A great mistake is thus brought under notice. It is Brahman, neuter, which ought to be referred to as Hamsavahana, that which uses the swan as its vehicle, and not Brahma, the creator, who is the real Kalahamsa, while Brahman, neuter, is Hamsa, and Ahamsa, as will be explained in the commentaries. Let it be understood that the terms Brahma and Parabrahman are not used here because they belong to our esoteric nomenclature, but simply because they are more familiar to the students in the West. Both are the perfect equivalents of our 1, 3, and 7 voweled terms, which stand for the one all, and the one all in all. Such are the basic conceptions on which the secret doctrine rests. It would not be in place here to enter upon any defense or proof of their inherent reasonableness, nor can I pause to show how they are, in fact, contained though too often under a misleading guise in every system of thought or philosophy worthy of the name. Once that the reader has gained a clear comprehension of them and realized the light which they throw on every problem of life, they will need no further justification in his eyes, because their truth will be to him as evident as the sun in heaven. I pass on, therefore, to the subject matter of the stanzas as given in this volume, adding a skeleton outline of them, in the hope of thereby rendering the task of the student more easy, by placing before him in a few words the general conception therein explained. The history of cosmic evolution, as traced in the stanzas, is, so to say, the abstract algebraical formula of that evolution. Hence the student must not expect to find there an account of all the stages and transformations which intervene between the first beginnings of universal evolution and our present state. To give such an account would be as impossible as it would be incomprehensible to men who cannot grasp the nature of even the plane of existence next to that to which, for the moment, their consciousness is limited. The stanzas, therefore, give an abstract formula which can be applied, mutatis mutandis, to all evolution, to that of our tiny Earth, to that of the chain of planets of which that Earth forms one, to the solar universe to which that chain belongs, and so on, in an ascending scale, till the mind reels and is exhausted in the effort. The 7 stanzas given in this volume represent the 7 terms of this abstract formula. They refer to, and describe, the 7 great stages of the evolutionary process, which are spoken of in the Puranas as the 7 creations, and in the Bible as the days of creation. Stanza I describes the state of the One All during Pralaya, before the first flutter of reawakening manifestation. A moment's thought shows that such a state can only be symbolized, to describe it is impossible. Nor can it be symbolized except in negatives, for, since it is the state of absoluteness per se, it can possess none of those specific attributes which serve us to describe objects in positive terms. Hence that state can only be suggested by the negatives of all those most abstract attributes which men feel rather than conceive, as the remotest limits attainable by their power of conception. Stanza 2 describes a stage which, to a Western mind, is so nearly identical with that mentioned in stanza I, that to express the idea of its difference would require a treatise in itself. Hence it must be left to the intuition and the higher faculties of the reader to grasp, as far as he can, the meaning of the allegorical phrases used. Indeed, it must be remembered that all these stanzas appeal to the inner faculties rather than to the ordinary comprehension of the physical brain. Stanza 3 describes the reawakening of the universe to life after Pralaya. It depicts the emergence of the monads from their state of absorption within the One, the earliest and highest stage in the formation of worlds, the term monad being one which may apply equally to the vastest solar system or the tiniest atom. Stanza 4 shows the differentiation of the germ of the universe into the septenary hierarchy of conscious divine powers, which are the active manifestations of the One Supreme Energy. They are the framers, shapers, and ultimately the creators of all the manifested universe. In the only sense in which the name creator is intelligible, they inform and guide it. They are the intelligent beings who adjust and control evolution, embodying in themselves those manifestations of the one law, which we know as the laws of nature. Generically, they are known as the Dhyan Kohans, though each of the various groups has its own designation in the secret doctrine. This stage of evolution is spoken of in Hindu mythology as the creation of the gods. Stanza V describes the process of world formation. First, diffused cosmic matter, then the fiery whirlwind, the first stage in the formation of a nebula. This nebula condenses, and after passing through various transformations, forms a solar universe, a planetary chain, or a single planet, as the case may be. Stanza 6 indicates the subsequent stages in the formation of a world and brings the evolution of such a world down to its 4th great period, corresponding to the period in which we are now living. Stanza 7 continues the history, tracing the descent of life down to the appearance of man, and thus closes the first book of the secret doctrine. The development of man from his first appearance on this earth in this round to the state in which we now find him will form the subject of Book 2. The stanzas which form the thesis of every section are given throughout in their modern translated version, as it would be worse than useless to make the subject still more difficult by introducing the archaic phraseology of the original, with its puzzling style and words. Extracts are given from the Chinese, Tibetan, and Sanskrit translations of the original Centaur commentaries and glosses on the Book of Jian, now rendered for the first time into a European language. It is almost unnecessary to state that only portions of the 7 stanzas are here given. Were they published complete, they would remain incomprehensible to all save a few high occultists. Nor is there any need to assure the reader that no more than most of the profane, does the writer, or rather the humble recorder, understand those forbidden passages. To facilitate the reading, and to avoid the too frequent reference to footnotes, it was thought best to blend together texts and glosses, using the Sanskrit and Tibetan proper names whenever these could not be avoided, in preference to giving the originals, the more so as the said terms are all accepted synonyms, the latter only being used between a master and his chelas, or disciples. Thus, were one to translate into English, using only the substantives and technical terms as employed in one of the Tibetan and Centaur versions. Shloka 1 would read as follows, though ag in Jijihu slept 7 korlo. Zadmanas Zhiba. All Nuke bosom. Kongkog not, Thunkem not, Lhakohan not, Tenbrol Chugni not, Dermakea ceased, Tigen Chang not become, Barnang and Ssa in Engovonia oi, alone though Og Yunsan in night of Sun Chan and Yang Grub Paranish Pana, etc., etc. This would sound like pure abracadabra. As this work is written for the instruction of students of occultism, and not for the benefit of philologists, we may well avoid such foreign terms wherever it is possible to do so. The untranslatable terms alone, incomprehensible unless their meanings are explained, are left, but all such terms are rendered in their Sanskrit form. Needless to remind the reader that these are, in almost every case, the late developments of the latter language, and pertain to the fifth root race. Sanskrit, as now known, was not spoken by the Atlanteans, and most of the philosophical terms used in the systems of the India of the post-Mahabharatan period are not found in the Vedas, nor are they to be met with in the original stanzas, but only their equivalents. The reader who is not a theosophist, is once more invited to regard all that follows as a fairy tale, if he likes, at best as one of the yet unproven speculations of dreamers, and, at the worst, as an additional hypothesis to the many scientific hypotheses past, present and future, some exploded, others still lingering. It is not in any sense less scientific than are many of the so-called scientific theories, and it is in every case more philosophical and probable. In view of the abundant comments and explanations required, the references to the footnotes are marked in the usual way, while the sentences to be commented upon are marked with letters. Additional matter will be found in the chapters on symbolism, which are often more full of information than the commentaries. Part I Cosmic Evolution. 7 stanzas from the Book of Jin, with commentaries. Nor ought nor not existed, yon bright sky was not, nor heaven's broad roof outstretched above. What covered all? What sheltered? What concealed? Was it the water's fathomless abyss? There was no death, yet there was not immortal. There was no confine betwixt day and night. The only one breathed breathless by itself. Other than it there nothing since has been. Darkness there was, and all at first was veiled. In gloom profound an ocean without light. The germ that still lay covered in the husk burst forth, one nature, from the fervent heat. Who knows the secret? Who proclaimed it here? Whence this manifold creation sprang? The gods themselves came later into being. Who knows from whence this great creation sprang? That, whence all this great creation came? Whether its will created or was mute? The Most High Seer that is in highest heaven. He knows it, or perchance even he knows not. Gazing into eternity, ere the foundations of the earth were laid, thou wert. And when the subterranean flame shall burst its prison and devour the frame, thou shalt be still as thou wert before, and know no change, when time shall be no more. Oh, endless thought, divine eternity! Rig Veda, Colebrook. 7 stanzas from the Book of Jin. Stanza I. 1. The eternal parent, wrapped in her ever-invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. 2. Time was not, for it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration. 3. Universal mind was not, for there were no ahai to contain it. 4. The 7 ways to bliss were not. The great causes of misery were not, for there was no one to produce and get ensnared by them. 5. Darkness alone filled the boundless all, for Father, Mother and Son were once more one, and the sun had not yet awakened for the new wheel and his pilgrimage thereon. 6. The 7 sublime lords and the 7 truths had ceased to be, and the universe, the son of necessity, was immersed in Parinishpana, to be outbreathed by that which is, and yet is not. Not was. 7. The causes of existence had been done away with, the visible that was, and the invisible that is, rested in eternal non-being, the one being. 8. Alone, the one form of existence stretched boundless, infinite, causeless, in dreamless sleep, and life pulsated unconscious in universal space, throughout that all-presence, which is sensed by the opened eye of Dangma. 9. But where was Dangma when the alaya of the universe was in Paramartha, and the great wheel was in Upadaka? Stanza 2. 1. Where were the builders, the luminous sons of Manvantaric dawn? In the unknown darkness in their ahai Parinishpana. The producers of form from no form, the root of the world, the Devamatri and Svabhavat, rested in the bliss of non-being. 2. Where was silence? Were the ears to sense it? No, there was neither silence nor sound, naught save ceaseless eternal breath, which knows itself not. 3. The hour had not yet struck, the ray had not yet flashed into the germ, the Matrapadma had not yet swollen. 4. Her heart had not yet opened for the one ray to enter, thence to fall, as 3 into 4, into the lap of Maya. 5. The 7 were not yet born from the web of light. Darkness alone was father-mother, Svabhavat, and Svabhavat was in darkness. 6. These two are the germ, and the germ is one. The universe was still concealed in the divine thought and the divine bosom. Stanza 3. 1. The last vibration of the 7th eternity thrills through infinitude. The mother swells, expanding from within without, like the bud of the lotus. 2. The vibration sweeps along, touching with its swift wing the whole universe and the germ that dwelleth in darkness, the darkness that breathes over the slumbering waters of life. 3. Darkness radiates light, and light drops one solitary ray into the waters, into the mother deep. The ray shoots through the virgin egg, the ray causes the eternal egg to thrill, and drop the non-eternal germ, which condenses into the world egg. 4. The 3 fall into the 4. The radiant essence becomes 7 inside, 7 outside. The luminous egg, which in itself is 3, curdles and spreads in milk-white curds throughout the depths of mother, the root that grows in the depths of the ocean of life. 5. The root remains, the light remains, the curds remain, and still Eaho is one. 6. The root of life was in every drop of the ocean of immortality, and the ocean was radiant light, which was fire and heat and motion. Darkness vanished and was no more, it disappeared in its own essence, the body of fire and water, of father and mother. 7. Behold, Olanu, the radiant child of the two, the unparalleled refulgent glory bright space, son of dark space, who emerges from the depths of the great dark waters. It is Eahu, the younger, He shines forth as the sun, he is the blazing divine dragon of wisdom, the Eka is Shatur, and Shatur takes to itself Tri, and the union produces the Sapta, in whom are the 7, which become the Tridasa, the hosts and the multitudes. Behold him lifting the veil, and unfurling it from east to west. He shuts out the above, and leaves the below to be seen as the great illusion. He marks the places for the shining ones, and turns the upper into a shoreless sea of fire, and the one manifested into the great waters. 8. Where was the germ, and where was now darkness? Where is the spirit of the flame that burns in thy lamp, Olanu? The germ is that, and that is light, the white brilliant sun of the dark hidden Father. 9. Light is cold flame, and flame is fire, and fire produces heat, which yields water, the water of life in the Great Mother. 10. Father-Mother spin a web, whose upper end is fastened to spirit, the light of the one darkness, and the lower one to its shadowy end, matter, and this web is the universe, spun out of the two substances made in one, which is Svabhavat. 11. It expands when the breath of fire is upon it, it contracts when the breath of the mother touches it. Then the sons dissociate and scatter, to return into their mother's bosom, at the end of the great day, and re-become one with her. When it is cooling, it becomes radiant. Its sons expand and contract through their own selves and hearts, they embrace infinitude. 12. Then Svabhavat sends Fahat to harden the atoms. Each is a part of the web. Reflecting the self-existent Lord, like a mirror, each becomes in turn a world. Stanza 4. 1. Listen, ye sons of the earth, to your instructors the sons of the fire. Learn, there is neither first nor last, for all is one number, issued from no number. 2. Learn what we, who descend from the primordial seven, we, who are born from the primordial flame, have learnt from our fathers. 3. From the effulgency of light the ray of the ever-darkness sprang in space, the reawakened energies, the one from the egg, the 6, and the 5. Then the 3, the 1, the 4, the 1, the 5, the twice 7, the sum total. And these are the essences, the flames, the elements, the builders, the numbers, the arupa, the rupa, and the force or divine man, the sum total. And from the divine man emanated the forms, the sparks, the sacred animals, and the messengers of the sacred fathers within the holy four. 4. This was the army of the voice, the divine mother of the seven. The sparks of the seven are subject to, and the servants of, the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh of the seven. These are called spheres, triangles, cubes, lines and modelers, for thus stands the eternal Nidana the Oihaho. 5. The Oihaho, which is darkness, the boundless, or the no number, Adi Nidana Svabhavat, the circle. I. The Adi Sanat, the number, for he is one. 2. The voice of the word, Svabhavat, the numbers, for he is 1 and 9. 3. The formless square. And these 3, enclosed within the circle, are the sacred 4, and the 10 are the Arupa universe. Then come the sons, the 7 fighters, the 1, the 8th left out, and his breath which is the light maker. 6. Then the second 7, who are the Lipika, produced by the 3. The rejected son is 1. The sons are countless. Stanza v. 1. The primordial 7, the first 7 breaths of the dragon of wisdom, produce in their turn from their holy circumgyrating breaths the fiery whirlwind. 2. They make of him the messenger of their will. The Jaya becomes Fahat, the swift son of the divine sons, whose sons are the Lipika, runs circular errands. Fahat is the steed, and the thought is the rider. He passes like lightning through the fiery clouds, takes 3 and 5 and 7 strides through the 7 regions above, and the 7 below. He lifts his voice, and calls the innumerable sparks, and joins them together. 3. He is their guiding spirit and leader. When he commences work, he separates the sparks of the lower kingdom that float and thrill with joy in their radiant dwellings, and forms therewith the germs of wheels. He places them in the 6 directions of space, and one in the middle the central wheel. 4. Fahat traces spiral lines to unite the 6th to the 7th the crown. An army of the sons of light stands at each angle, the Lipika, in the middle wheel. They say, his is good. The first divine world is ready, the first, the second. Then the divine Arupa reflects itself in Chayaloka, the first garment of Anupadaka. 5. Fahat takes 5 strides, and builds a winged wheel at each corner of the square for the 4 holy ones, and their armies. 6. The Lipika circumscribe the triangle, the first one, the cube, the second one, and the pentacle within the egg. It is the ring called pass not for those who descend and ascend, who during the Kalpa are progressing towards the great day be with us. Thus were formed the Arupa and the Rupa, from one light, 7 lights, from each of the 7, 7 times 7 lights. The wheels watch the ring. Stanza 6. 1. By the power of the Mother of Mercy and Knowledge, Kuan Yin the triple of Kuan Shi Yin, residing in Kuan Yin Tian Fahat, the breath of their progeny, the son of the sons, having called forth, from the lower abyss, the elusive form of Sinchen and the 7 elements. 2. The swift and the radiant one produces the 7 Laya centers, against which none will prevail to the great day be with us, and seats the universe on these eternal foundations, surrounding Sinchen with the elementary germs. 3. Of the 7 first 1 manifested, 6 concealed, 2 manifested, 5 concealed, 3 manifested, 4 concealed, 4 produced, 3 hidden, 4 and 1 tsan revealed, 2 and 1/2 concealed, 6 to be manifested, 1 laid aside. Lastly, 7 small wheels revolving, one giving birth to the other. 4. He builds them in the likeness of older wheels, placing them on the imperishable centers. How does Fahat build them? He collects the fiery dust. He makes balls of fire, runs through them, and round them, infusing life thereinto, then sets them into motion, some one way, some the other way. They are cold, he makes them hot. They are dry, he makes them moist. They shine, he fans and cools them. Thus acts Fahat from one twilight to the other, during 7 eternities. 5. At the 4th, the sons are told to create their images. 1/3 refuses. 2 obey. The curse is pronounced. They will be born in the 4th, suffer and cause suffering. This is the first war. 6. The older wheels rotated downward and upward. The mother's spawn filled the whole. There were battles fought between the creators and the destroyers, and battles fought for space, the seed appearing and reappearing continuously. 7. Make thy calculations, O Lanu, if thou wouldst learn the correct age of thy small wheel. Its 4th spoke is our mother. Reach the 4th fruit of the 4th path of knowledge that leads to nirvana, and thou shalt comprehend, for thou shalt see. Stanza 7. 1. Behold the beginning of sentient formless life. First, the divine, the one from the mother spirit, then, the spiritual, the 3 from the 1, the 4 from the 1, and the 5, from which the 3, the 5, and the 7. These are the threefold and the fourfold downward, the mind-born sons of the First Lord, the shining 7. It is they who are thou, I, he, O Lanu, they who watch over thee and thy mother, Bhumi. 2. The one ray multiplies the smaller rays. Life precedes form, and life survives the last atom. Through the countless rays the life ray, the one, like a thread through many beads. 3. When the one becomes 2, the threefold appears, and the 3 are 1, and it is our thread, O Lanu, the heart of the man-plant called Saptaparna. 4. It is the root that never dies, the 3-tongued flame of the 4 wicks. The wicks are the sparks, that draw from the 3-tongued flame shot out by the 7 there flame the beams and sparks of one moon reflected in the running waves of all the rivers of earth. 5. The spark hangs from the flame by the finest thread of Fahat. It journeys through the 7 worlds of Maya. It stops in the first, and is a metal and a stone. It passes into the second, and behold a plant. The plant whirls through 7 changes and becomes a sacred animal. From the combined attributes of these, Manu, the thinker, is formed. Who forms him? The 7 lives and the 1 life. Who completes him? The 5-fold Laha. And who perfects the last body? Fish, Sin, and Soma. 6. From the firstborn the thread between the silent watcher and his shadow becomes more strong and radiant with every change. The morning sunlight has changed into noonday glory. 7. This is thy present wheel, said the flame to the spark. Thou art myself, my image and my shadow. I have clothed myself in thee, and thou art my Vahan to the day be with us, when thou shalt re-become myself and others, thyself and me. Then the builders, having donned their first clothing, descend on radiant earth and reign over men who are themselves. Thus ends this portion of the archaic narrative, dark, confused, almost incomprehensible. An attempt will now be made to throw light into this darkness, to make sense out of this apparent nonsense. Commentaries on the 7 stanzas and their terms, according to their numeration in stanzas and shlokas. Stanza I. 1. The eternal parent, 54 wrapped in her ever-invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. The parent, space, is the eternal, ever-present cause of all the incomprehensible deity, whose invisible robes are the mystic root of all matter, and of the universe. Space is the one eternal thing that we can most easily imagine, immovable in its abstraction and uninfluenced by either the presence or absence in it of an objective universe. It is without dimension, in every sense, and self-existent. Spirit is the first differentiation from that, the causeless cause of both spirit and matter. As taught in the esoteric catechism, it is neither a limitless void, nor conditioned fullness, but both. It was and ever will be. Thus, the robes stand for the noumenon of undifferentiated cosmic matter. It is not matter as we know it, but the spiritual essence of matter, and is co-eternal and even one with space in its abstract sense. Root nature is also the source of the subtle invisible properties in visible matter. It is the soul, so to say, of the one infinite spirit. The Hindus call it Malaprakriti, and say that it is the primordial substance, which is the basis of the upadi or vehicle of every phenomenon, whether physical, psychic or mental. It is the source from which Akasha radiates. By the 7 eternities, eons or periods are meant. The word eternity, as understood in Christian theology, has no meaning to the Asiatic ear, except in its application to the one existence, nor is the term sempiternity, the eternal only in futurity, anything better than a misnomer. 55 such words do not and cannot exist in philosophical metaphysics, and were unknown till the advent of ecclesiastical Christianity. The 7 eternities mean the 7 periods, or a period answering in its duration to the 7 periods, of a Manvantara, extending throughout a Mahakalpa or Great Age, 100 years of Brahma, making a total of 311,040,000,000,000 of years, each year of Brahma being composed of 360 days, and of the same number of nights of Brahma, reckoning by the Chandrayana or lunar year, and a day of Brahma consisting of 4,320,000,000 of mortal years. These eternities belong to the most secret calculations, in which, in order to arrive at the true total, every figure must be 7x, x varying according to the nature of the cycle in the subjective or real world, and every figure relating to, or representing, the different cycles from the greatest to the smallest in the objective or unreal world, must necessarily be multiples of 7. The key to this cannot be given, for herein lies the mystery of esoteric calculations, and for the purposes of ordinary calculation it has no sense. The number 7, says the Kabbalah, is the great number of the divine mysteries. Number 10 is that of all human knowledge. The Pythagorean decade, 1000 is the number 10 to the third power, and therefore the number 7000 is also symbolical. In the secret doctrine the figure 4 is the male symbol only on the highest plane of abstraction. On the plane of matter the 3 is the masculine and the 4 the feminine, the upright and the horizontal in the fourth stage of symbolism, when the symbols become the glyphs of the generative powers on the physical plane. 2. Time was not, for it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration. Time is only an illusion produced by the succession of our states of consciousness as we travel through eternal duration, and it does not exist where no consciousness exists in which the illusion can be produced, but lies asleep. The present is only a mathematical line which divides that part of eternal duration which we call the future, from that part which we call the past. Nothing on earth has real duration, for nothing remains without change or the same for the billionth part of a second, and the sensation we have of the actuality of the division of time known as the present, comes from the blurring of the momentary glimpse, or succession of glimpses, of things that our senses give us, as those things pass from the region of ideals, which we call the future, to the region of memories that we name the past. In the same way we experience a sensation of duration in the case of the instantaneous electric spark, by reason of the blurred and continuing impression on the retina. The real person or thing does not consist solely of what is seen at any particular moment, but is composed of the sum of all its various and changing conditions from its appearance in material form to its disappearance from earth. It is these sum totals that exist from eternity in the future, and pass by degrees through matter, to exist for eternity in the past. No one would say that a bar of metal dropped into the sea came into existence as it left the air, and ceased to exist as it entered the water, and that the bar itself consisted only of that cross-section thereof which at any given moment coincided with the mathematical plane that separates, and, at the same time, joins, the atmosphere and the ocean. Even so of persons and things, which, dropping out of the to be into the has been, out of the future into the past present momentarily to our senses a cross-section, as it were, of their total selves, as they pass through time and space, as matter, on their way from one eternity to another, and these two eternities constitute that duration in which alone anything has true existence, were our senses but able to cognize it. 3. Universal mind was not, for there were no Ahai 56 to contain it. 57. Mind is a name given to the sum of the states of consciousness, grouped under thought, will and feeling. During deep sleep ideation ceases on the physical plane, and memory is in abeyance, thus for the time being mind is not, because the organ, through which the ego manifests ideation and memory on the material plane, has temporarily ceased to function. A noumenon can become a phenomenon on any plane of existence only by manifesting on that plane through an appropriate basis or vehicle, and during the long night of rest called pralaya, when all the existences are dissolved, the universal mind remains as a permanent possibility of mental action, or as that abstract absolute thought, of which mind is the concrete relative manifestation. The Ahai, Dhyan Kohans, are the collective hosts of spiritual beings, the angelic hosts of Christianity, the Elohim and messengers of the Jews who are the vehicle for the manifestation of the divine or universal thought and will. They are the intelligent forces that give to, and enact in, nature her laws, while they themselves act according to laws imposed upon them in a similar manner by still higher powers, but they are not the personifications of the powers of nature, as erroneously thought. This hierarchy of spiritual beings, through which the universal mind comes into action, is like an army, a host, truly by means of which the fighting power of a nation manifests itself, and which is composed of army corps, divisions, brigades, regiments, and so forth, each with its separate individuality or life, and its limited freedom of action and limited responsibilities, each contained in a larger individuality, to which its own interests are subservient, and each containing lesser individualities in itself. 4. The 7 ways to bliss 58 were not, a. The great causes of misery 59 were not, for there was no one to produce and get ensnared by them, b. a. There are 7 paths or ways to the bliss of non-existence, which is absolute being, existence, and consciousness. They were not, because the universe, so far, was empty, and existed only in the divine thought. b. For it is, the 12 nidanas, or causes of being. Each is the effect of its antecedent cause, and a cause, in its turn, to its successor, the sum total of the nidanas being based on the 4 truths, a doctrine especially characteristic of the Hinayana system. 60. They belong to the theory of the stream of catenate law which produces merit and demerit, and finally brings karma into full sway. It is a system based upon the great truth that reincarnation is to be dreaded, as existence in this world entails upon man only suffering, misery and pain, death itself being unable to deliver man from it, since death is merely the door through which he passes to another life on earth after a little rest on its threshold. Devachan. The Hinayana system, or school of the little vehicle, is of very ancient growth, while the Mahayana, or school of the great vehicle, is of a later period, having originated after the death of Buddha. Yet the tenets of the latter are as old as the hills that have contained such schools from time immemorial, and the Hinayana and Mahayana schools both teach the same doctrine in reality. Yana, or vehicle, is a mystic expression, both vehicles inculcating that man may escape the sufferings of rebirth and even the false bliss of Devachan, by obtaining wisdom and knowledge, which alone can dispel the fruits of illusion and ignorance. Maya, or illusion, is an element which enters into all finite things, for everything that exists has only a relative, not an absolute, reality, since the appearance which the hidden noumenon assumes for any observer depends upon his power of cognition. To the untrained eye of the savage, a painting is at first an unmeaning confusion of streaks and daubs of color, while an educated eye sees instantly a face or a landscape. Nothing is permanent except the one hidden absolute existence which contains in itself the noumena of all realities. The existences belonging to every plane of being, up to the highest Tyan Kohans, are, comparatively, like the shadows cast by a magic lantern on a colorless screen. Nevertheless, all things are relatively real, for the cognizer is also a reflection, and the things cognized are therefore as real to him as himself. Whatever reality things possess, must be looked for in them before or after they have passed like a flash through the material world, for we cannot cognize any such existence directly, so long as we have sense instruments which bring only material existence into the field of our consciousness. Whatever plane our consciousness may be acting in, both we and the things belonging to that plane are, for the time being, our only realities. But as we rise in the scale of development, we perceive that in the stages through which we have passed, we mistook shadows for realities, and that the upward progress of the ego is a series of progressive awakenings, each advance bringing with it the idea that now, at last, we have reached reality, but only when we shall have reached absolute consciousness, and blended our own with it, shall we be free from the delusions produced by Maya. 5. Darkness alone filled the boundless all, for father, mother and son were once more one, and the son had not yet awakened for the new wheel 61 and his pilgrimage thereon, darkness is father-mother, light their son, says an old Eastern proverb. Light is inconceivable except as coming from some source which is the cause of it, and as, in the case of primordial light, that source is unknown, though so strongly demanded by reason and logic, therefore it is called darkness by us, from an intellectual point of view. As to borrowed or secondary light, whatever its source, it can be only of a temporary Mayavic character. Darkness, then, is the eternal matrix in which the sources of light appear and disappear. Nothing is added to darkness to make of it light, or to light to make it darkness, on this our plane. They are interchangeable, and, scientifically, light is but a mode of darkness and vice versa. Yet both are phenomena of the same noumenon, which is absolute darkness to the scientific mind, and but a grey twilight to the perception of the average mystic, though to that of the spiritual eye of the initiate it is absolute light. How far we discern the light that shines in darkness depends upon our powers of vision. What is light to us is darkness to certain insects, and the eye of the clairvoyant sees illumination where the normal eye perceives only blackness. When the whole universe was plunged in sleep, had returned to its one primordial element, there was neither center of luminosity, nor eye to perceive light, and darkness necessarily filled the boundless all. b. The father and mother are the male and female principles in root nature, the opposite poles that manifest in all things on every plane of cosmos or spirit and substance, in a less allegorical aspect, the resultant of which is the universe, or the sun. They are once more one, when in the night of Brahma, during Pralaya, all in the objective universe has returned to its one primal and eternal cause, to reappear at the following dawn as it does periodically. Karana, eternal cause, was alone. To put it more plainly, Karana is alone during the nights of Brahma. The previous objective universe has dissolved into its one primal and eternal cause, and is, so to say, held in solution in space, to differentiate again and crystallize out anew at the following Manvataric dawn, which is the commencement of a new day or new activity of Brahma, the symbol of a universe. In esoteric parlance, Brahma is Father, Mother, Son, or Spirit, soul and body at once, each personage being symbolical of an attribute, and each attribute or quality being a graduated efflux of divine breath in its cyclic differentiation, involutionary and evolutionary. In the cosmico-physical sense, it is the universe, the planetary chain, and the earth; in the purely spiritual, the unknown deity, planetary spirit, and man, the son of the two, the creature of spirit and matter, and a manifestation of them in his periodical appearances on earth during the wheels, or the Manvantaras. 6. The seven sublime lords and the seven truths had ceased to be, and the universe, the son of necessity, was immersed in Parinishpana, 62, b. To be outbreathed by that which is, and yet is not. Not was, c. a. The seven sublime lords are the seven creative spirits, the Dhyan Kohans, who correspond to the Hebrew Elohim. It is the same hierarchy of archangels to which St. Michael, St. Gabriel, and others belong, in Christian theogony. Only while St. Michael, for instance, is allowed in dogmatic Latin theology to watch over all the promontories and gulfs, in the esoteric system the Dhyanis watch successively over one of the rounds and the great root races of our planetary chain. They are, moreover, said to send their bodhisattvas, the human correspondents of the Dhyani Buddhas, during every round and race. Out of the seven truths and revelations, or rather revealed secrets, 4 only have been handed to us, as we are still in the 4th round, and the world also has had only 4 Buddhas, so far. This is a very complicated question, and will receive more ample treatment later on. So far there are only 4 truths, and 4 Vedas, say the Buddhists and Hindus. For a similar reason Irenaeus insisted on the necessity of 4 Gospels. But as every new root race at the head of a round must have its revelation and revealers, the next round will bring the 5th, the following the 6th, and so on. b. Parinishpana is the absolute perfection to which all existences attain at the close of a great period of activity, or Mahamanvantara, and in which they rest during the succeeding period of repose. In Tibetan it is called Yang Grub. Up to the day of the Yogacarya school the true nature of parinirvana was taught publicly, but since then it has become entirely esoteric, hence so many contradictory interpretations of it. It is only a true idealist who can understand it. Everything has to be viewed as ideal, with the exception of parinirvana, by him who would comprehend that state, and acquire a knowledge of how non-ego, voidness, and darkness are three in one, and alone self-existent and perfect. It is absolute, however, only in a relative sense, for it must give room to still further absolute perfection, according to a higher standard of excellence in the following period of activity, just as a perfect flower must cease to be a perfect flower and die, in order to grow into a perfect fruit, if such a mode of expression may be permitted. The secret doctrine teaches the progressive development of everything, worlds as well as atoms, and this stupendous development has neither conceivable beginning nor imaginable end. Our universe is only one of an infinite number of universes, all of them sons of necessity, because links in the great cosmic chain of universes, each one standing in the relation of an effect as regards its predecessor, and of a cause as regards its successor. The appearance and disappearance of the universe are pictured as an outbreathing and inbreathing of the great breath, which is eternal, and which, being motion, is one of the three symbols of the absolute abstract space, and duration being the other two. When the great breath is projected, it is called the divine breath, and is regarded as the breathing of the unknowable deity, the one existence which breathes out a thought, as it were, which becomes the cosmos. So also is it that when the divine breath is inspired, the universe disappears into the bosom of the Great Mother, who then sleeps wrapped in her ever-invisible robes. See, by that which is, and yet is not, is meant the great breath itself, which we can only speak of as absolute existence, but cannot picture to our imagination as any form of existence that we can distinguish from non-existence. The three periods, the present, the past, and the future, are in esoteric philosophy a compound time, for the three are a composite number only in relation to the phenomenal plane, but in the realm of noumena have no abstract validity. As said in the scriptures, the past time is the present time, as also the future, which, though it has not come into existence, still is, according to a precept in the Prasanga Madhyamika teaching, whose dogmas have been known ever since it broke away from the purely esoteric schools. 63 Our ideas, in short, on duration and time are all derived from our sensations according to the laws of association. Inextricably bound up with the relativity of human knowledge, they nevertheless can have no existence except in the experience of the individual ego, and perish when its evolutionary march dispels the maya of phenomenal existence. What is time, for instance, but the panoramic succession of our states of consciousness? In the words of a master, I feel irritated at having to use these three clumsy words: past, present, and future, miserable concepts of the objective phases of the subjective whole. They are about as ill-adapted for the purpose as an axe for fine carving. One has to acquire paramartha lest one should become too easy a prey to samvritti is a philosophical axiom. 64. 7. The causes of existence had been done away with. A. The visible that was, and the invisible that is, rested in eternal non-being, the one being. B. A. The causes of existence mean not only the physical causes known to science, but the metaphysical causes, the chief of which is the desire to exist, an outcome of nidana and maya. This desire for a sentient life shows itself in everything, from an atom to a sun, and is a reflection of the divine thought propelled into objective existence, into a law that the universe should exist. According to esoteric teaching, the real cause of that supposed desire, and of all existence, remains forever hidden, and its first emanations are the most complete abstractions mind can conceive. These abstractions must of necessity be postulated as the cause of the material universe which presents itself to the senses and intellect, and must underlie the secondary and subordinate powers of nature, which have been anthropomorphized and worshipped as God and gods by the common herd of every age. It is impossible to conceive anything without a cause, the attempt to do so makes the mind a blank. This is virtually the condition to which the mind must come at last when we try to trace back the chain of causes and effects, but both science and religion jump to this condition of blankness much more quickly than is necessary, for they ignore the metaphysical abstractions which are the only conceivable causes of physical concretions. These abstractions become more and more concrete as they approach our plane of existence, until finally they phenomenalize in the form of the material universe, by a process of conversion of metaphysics into physics, analogous to that by which steam can be condensed into water, and water frozen into ice. b. The idea of eternal non-being, which is the one being, will appear a paradox to anyone who does not remember that we limit our ideas of being to our present consciousness of existence, making it a specific, instead of a generic term. An unborn infant, could it think in our acceptation of that term, would necessarily in a similar manner limit its conception of being to the intrauterine life which alone it knows, and were it to endeavor to express to its consciousness the idea of life after birth, death to it, it would, in the absence of data to go upon, and of faculties to comprehend such data, probably express that life is non-being which is real being. In our case the one being is the noumenon of all the noumena which we know must underlie phenomena, and give them whatever shadow of reality they possess, but which we have not the senses or the intellect to cognize at present. The impalpable atoms of gold scattered through the substance of a ton of auriferous quartz may be imperceptible to the naked eye of the miner, yet he knows that they are not only present there, but that they alone give his quartz any appreciable value, and this relation of the gold to the quartz may faintly shadow forth that of the noumenon to the phenomenon. Only the miner knows what the gold will look like when extracted from the quartz, whereas the common mortal can form no conception of the reality of things separated from the Maya which veils them, and in which they are hidden. Alone the initiate, rich with the lore acquired by numberless generations of his predecessors, directs the eye of Dangma toward the essence of things on which no Maya can have any influence. It is here that the teachings of esoteric philosophy in relation to the Nidanas and the Four Truths become of the greatest importance, but they are secret. 8. Alone, the one form of existence, a. Stretched boundless, infinite, causeless, in dreamless sleep, b. And life pulsated unconscious in universal space, throughout that all-presence, which is sensed by the opened eye of Dangma. 65. a. The tendency of modern thought is to recur to the archaic idea of a homogeneous basis for apparently widely different things. Heterogeneity developed from homogeneity. Biologists are now searching for their homogeneous protoplasm and chemists for their protyle, while science is looking for the force of which electricity, magnetism, heat, and so forth, are the differentiations. The secret doctrine carries this idea into the region of metaphysics, and postulates a one form of existence as the basis and source of all things. But perhaps the phrase, the one form of existence, is not altogether correct. The Sanskrit word is prabhavapaya, the place or rather plane whence is the origination, and into which is the resolution of all things, as a commentator says. It is not the mother of the world, as translated by Wilson, 66 for Jagad Yoni, as shown by Fitz-Edward Hall, is scarcely so much the mother of the world, or the womb of the world, as the material cause of the world. The Puranic commentators explain it by Karana, cause, but esoteric philosophy, by the ideal spirit of that cause. In its secondary stage, it is the svabhavit of the Buddhist philosopher, the eternal cause and effect, omnipresent yet abstract, the self-existent plastic essence and the root of all things, viewed in the same dual light as the Vedantin views his Parabrahman and Malaprakriti, the one under two